You are lying down in the gathering darkness, and the cold is all around you, pressing against the bark walls of the longhouse like a patient animal waiting to be let in. Outside, the winter wind moves through the bare branches of the oak and ash trees, a sound that never fully stops, only rises and falls in slow waves that you have learned to measure without thinking. Inside, the air is different, thicker, warmer in some places, still cold in others, layered like water in a lake where the surface freezes first and the depths remain dark and moving. You are here, in this long chamber of wood and earth and smoke, and you are learning what your body has always known. That warmth is not a given thing, not a constant, but something you must cultivate and guard and share. The longhouse stretches away from you in both directions, a corridor of shadow and firelight that seems to have no clear beginning or end. You have walked its length many times today, stepping carefully over the smooth-worn earthen floor, passing the hearths that mark each family's territory like small constellations of warmth in the cold universe of the interior. There are 5 fires tonight, or perhaps 6. It is hard to tell in the smoke that hangs perpetually in the upper reaches of the structure, curling around the roof poles and seeping slowly through the smoke holes cut in the bark above. The fires are not large. They are tended with care, fed with only enough wood to keep the coals glowing, the flames low and steady, because wood is not infinite, because winter is long, because you have learned through generations that a small fire carefully maintained will outlast a great blaze that consumes everything at once. You have wrapped yourself in furs tonight, as you do every night when the frost comes. The deer hide lies closest to your skin, soft and supple from the oils and smoke that have worked into it over the years. Over that, a heavier fur, bear, perhaps, or wolf, something with deep insulation and weight that presses down on you like a hand, like a presence, holding the warmth of your body close. Beneath you, there are more layers, woven mats of cattail and bulrush, thick and dry, separating you from the cold earth below. The platform you sleep on is raised, built along the inner walls of the longhouse, a long shelf that runs almost the entire length of the structure, wide enough for several people to lie side by side. You are not alone here. You have never been alone in the sleeping, not in all the winters you can remember. To your left, so close that you can feel the warmth radiating from their body, even through the layers of hide and fur, lies another person. You do not need to see their face to know who they are. The rhythm of their breathing, the particular quality of their presence, the way they shift and settle in the night, all of this is as familiar to you as your own heartbeat. To your right, another body, and beyond that more, an unbroken line of sleepers arranged along the platform like birds on a branch, each one a small furnace of life, each one contributing to the collective warmth that makes survival possible. This is how you have always slept. This is how your parents slept, and their parents, and all the generations that stretched back into the time before memory, when the first longhouses were built, and the first people learned that the cold could be endured, even welcomed, if you knew how to meet it properly. The fire nearest to you, the one that belongs to your family's section of the longhouse, has burned down to a bed of coals that glow deep orange and red, colors that seem to pulse with their own slow heartbeat. Someone will rise in a few hours to feed it, to place another small piece of wood on the coals, to keep it alive through the darkest and coldest part of the night. It might be you. It might be the person lying next to you, or the elder who sleeps closer to the fire, who wakes more easily now that age has made their sleep lighter and more fragile. It does not matter who does it. What matters is that it is done, that the fire does not die, that the small circle of warmth remains intact. You close your eyes, but sleep does not come immediately. It never does, not right away. There is a period of transition, a time when your body must adjust to the cold that seeps in despite all your preparations, that finds the small gaps in your coverings, the places where the furs do not quite meet, the exposed curve of your shoulder or the side of your face that remains open to the air. You breathe slowly, deliberately, watching the pale mist of your breath rise in the dimness. The air that enters your lungs is cold, shocking almost, but your body warms it, transforms it, sends it back out into the world changed. This exchange, cold in, warmth out, is the fundamental rhythm of winter sleep, the bargain you make with the season. Around you, the longhouse is full of small sounds. The crackle of the fires, yes, but also the breathing of many people, the rustle of furs and mats, the occasional cough or murmur or sigh. Somewhere farther down the structure, a child whimpers softly in sleep, and you hear the low, soothing voice of a parent, wordless and gentle, a sound like water over stones. A dog shifts position near one of the hearths, its claws clicking softly on the hard earth. The wind outside rises for a moment, and the bark walls creak and settle. And then the wind falls away again, and there is only the interior darkness and the smell of smoke and earth and bodies and time. You have been told that in other places, in other times, people sleep differently. That there are structures where each family has its own separate chamber, where walls divide one sleeping space from another, where warmth is created by means you can barely imagine, great fires contained in stone, heat that rises through floors, light that comes not from flames but from other sources entirely. You have heard these stories from travelers, from traders who come in the summer months with goods and news from distant territories. You have listened to their descriptions with interest, with curiosity, but also with a certain skepticism, because what they describe seems both wasteful and lonely. Why would you want to sleep alone, separated from the warmth of others? How would you survive the coldest nights, the times when the wind howls and the temperature drops so low that even the sap in the trees freezes and cracks like thunder? The longhouse makes sense in a way that these other arrangements do not. It is a structure born from necessity, shaped by the reality of the climate and the land, refined over countless generations into something that works, that keeps people alive, that allows communities to endure. The platform you lie on is approximately 2 feet above the ground. This elevation matters more than you might think. Cold air sinks, settles, pools in the lowest places. By sleeping above the floor, you avoid the worst of it, the deep cold that gathers like water in a depression. But you are not so high that you lose contact with the earth entirely, not so removed that you forget the ground beneath you, the clay and stone and root systems that anchor the longhouse to its place. There is wisdom in this middle position, this careful balance between protection and connection. You think about the construction of this place, though you were not present when it was built. It has stood for many years already, longer than your own life. You know the process, though, because you have helped repair it, have watched sections of bark wall being replaced, have seen the careful selection of saplings for roof poles, have learned which trees yield the best materials, and when they should be harvested. The longhouse is not a permanent structure in the way that stone buildings are permanent. It is meant to last perhaps 20 or 30 years before the bark decays too much, before the frame weakens, before a new one must be built. This impermanence is not a flaw but a feature, recognition that everything changes, that even shelter is temporary, that what matters is the knowledge of how to build, not the building itself. The length of the longhouse is considerable. You have paced it out many times, and you estimate it at perhaps 20 of your strides, maybe more. The width is less, perhaps 6 or 7 strides, enough for the sleeping platforms on either side and the central corridor where the fires burn and people move during waking hours. The height at the center is such that a tall person can stand upright without touching the roof poles, though the sleeping platforms, being along the walls where the roof slopes down, offer less headroom. The entire structure is sheathed in bark, great sheets of elm bark, overlapping like scales or shingles, lashed to the frame with strips of inner bark that have been soaked and twisted into rope. The bark is not perfectly sealed. There are gaps, small spaces where the pieces meet imperfectly, where the wind can enter in thin streams. But these gaps also allow smoke to escape, allow the structure to breathe, prevent the buildup of moisture that would rot the frame from within. You shift your position slightly, adjusting the furs around you, and the person next to you responds without waking, moving infinitesimally closer, creating a better seal against the cold. This unconscious cooperation is something you have all learned since childhood. In sleep, bodies know what waking minds must be taught. That warmth is a shared resource, that survival is collective, that the space between one person and another is a space that must be minimized when the cold comes pressing in. The darkness is not absolute. Even with your eyes closed, you are aware of the firelight, the way it shifts and flickers against your eyelids, creating patterns that are almost but not quite visible. When you open your eyes again, and you do because sleep is still hovering just out of reach, you see the smoke layer above you, illuminated from below by the fires, a horizontal plane of gray and brown that divides the longhouse into 2 realms. The lower realm where people live and breathe and sleep, and the upper realm where smoke gathers and heat rises, and the worst of the indoor air eventually finds its way to the smoke holes and out into the night. You wonder, not for the first time, what temperature it is outside. There is no way to know precisely, no instruments to measure such things, only the evidence of your senses and your experience. Cold enough that the water in the clay pots has a thin skin of ice in the morning. Cold enough that the mud between the bark sheets has frozen hard. Cold enough that you saw your breath all day, even in the middle hours when the sun was highest. But not so cold that the fires cannot keep the interior space bearable. Not so cold that survival becomes impossible. This is the range you live in during winter, the narrow band between merely cold and lethally cold, and you have learned to read its fluctuations the way others might read marks on a page. The smell of the longhouse is complex, layered, impossible to separate into individual components. There is smoke, of course, always smoke, worked so deeply into every surface that it has become part of the structure itself. There is the smell of the fires, which changes depending on what wood is burning. Oak has one smell, hickory another, pine a third. There is the smell of food, or the memory of food, because cooking happens here during the day, and the scents linger. There is the smell of the furs and hides, the slightly animal odor of worked leather and hair. There is the smell of earth, of the floor that has been packed and smoothed and walked on for years until it has taken on a polish, a density that is almost like stone. And there is the smell of people, of many bodies in a confined space, not unpleasant exactly, but human, unavoidable, the scent of life itself. You think about the land outside, though you cannot see it now. You know it intimately, the forest that surrounds the longhouse, the paths that lead to the water source, the fields where crops grow in warmer seasons, now lying fallow under frost. You know the trees individually, the old ones that have been here longer than the longhouse, that will be here after it falls and decays. You know where the deer paths run, where the best nuts can be gathered, where the clay for pots can be dug. This knowledge is not separate from the knowledge of how to sleep in winter, how to survive the cold. It is all part of the same understanding, the same relationship with place. The fire pops softly, a small sound in the larger silence. A coal splits, releasing a tiny shower of sparks that rise briefly and then fade, dying before they reach the smoke layer above. You watch this small drama without particular thought, your mind beginning to slow, to drift, to approach the edge of sleep. Your body is warmer now. The furs have trapped the heat your body produces, creating a microclimate, a small envelope of warmth that surrounds you. Your feet, which were cold when you first lay down, have begun to thaw. Your hands, tucked under the furs close to your body, are no longer stiff. The cold of your face, still exposed to the air, has become almost pleasant, a sharpness that makes you more aware of the warmth elsewhere. You have learned that sleep in winter is different from sleep in summer. In summer, you might sleep outside, on the roof of the longhouse where the air is cooler, where you can see the stars. Sleep comes easily then, quickly, without effort. But in winter, sleep is something you must work for, something you must invite and coax and prepare for. It requires the right arrangement of bodies and furs and fire, the right balance of warmth and cold, the right surrender to the collective space. You cannot simply close your eyes and drift away. You must become part of the longhouse first, must allow yourself to be absorbed into its larger body, its shared warmth, its communal breathing. Somewhere in the middle distance of the longhouse, you hear someone snoring, a deep, rhythmic sound that is oddly comforting. It speaks of deep sleep, of successful warmth, of a body that has relaxed completely into the night. You aspire to that state, that complete surrender. Not yet, but soon. You feel yourself sinking, your thoughts becoming less distinct, less urgent. The boundary between your body and the platform beneath you becomes less clear. The presence of the person next to you seems to merge with your own presence, as if you are not quite separate individuals, but parts of a larger organism, the sleeping longhouse itself. You think about the morning, though it is still many hours away. You know that when you wake, the fires will have burned lower, the cold will have crept in a bit more, and the first task will be to rebuild the flames, to push back the darkness and the chill. Someone will rise first. There is always someone who rises first, and they will move quietly, respectfully, adding wood to the coals, blowing gently to encourage the flames, careful not to wake the others before it is necessary. And then, one by one, people will stir and sit up and begin the slow process of returning to full consciousness, to the demands of day. But that is not now. Now is the time of descent, of letting go, of trusting that the longhouse will hold you, that the collective warmth will sustain you, that morning will come without your effort or vigilance. The wind outside rises again, and you hear it moving through the forest, a sound like distant water, like breathing. The longhouse settles around you, its timbers creaking softly, its bark walls flexing slightly under the pressure. These sounds are not alarming. They are expected, familiar, part of the nightly symphony that accompanies your sleep. The structure is strong enough to withstand this wind, and much stronger winds too. It has stood through many winters already. It will stand through this one. Your breathing has slowed without your noticing. The intervals between breaths have lengthened. Your heartbeat, though you cannot hear it, has settled into a deeper, slower rhythm. Your body is doing what it knows how to do, lowering its demands, conserving energy, preparing for the long stillness of sleep. The coldness of your face has become something you barely notice. It is simply part of the condition of winter sleep, like the darkness, like the smell of smoke, like the pressure of furs. You remember, in a distant way, that there are other seasons, that this cold is not permanent, that warmth will return. But that knowledge seems abstract now, theoretical. What is real is this moment, this darkness, this careful arrangement of bodies and fire and shelter. What is real is the longhouse and the night, and the wind that moves endlessly through the bare trees. What is real is the presence of others sleeping beside you, the invisible network of shared warmth that makes this possible. And then, without noticing the exact moment of transition, without marking the precise point where waking ends and sleep begins, you cross over. Your thoughts dissolve into something less than thought, into images without words, into the deep, slow currents of dreaming. Your body continues its work without you, maintaining its temperature, breathing its slow breaths, adjusting its position in tiny increments throughout the night. The fire burns on, tended by hands that rise from sleep just enough to feed it and then return to dreaming. The longhouse holds you all, a structure of wood and bark and human knowledge, standing against the winter cold, keeping the small community of sleepers alive and warm until morning. This is how people slept long ago. This is how warmth was made and shared and preserved through the darkest months. This is the long sleep, and you are in it now, part of its ancient rhythm, its patient wisdom, its quiet endurance. You arrive at the longhouse in late afternoon, when the light slants low through the smoke hole and catches the dust motes drifting in lazy spirals above the central hearth. The fire has been banked down to embers, glowing soft and orange beneath a thin veil of ash, waiting to be fed again when the evening meal demands it. The air inside is thick layered. Wood smoke sits heavy near the ceiling beams while cooler drafts slip along the earthen floor, seeking escape through gaps between wall planks that have shrunk and swelled through countless seasons. You can smell everything at once. The acrid sweetness of old smoke, the mineral dampness of earth packed beneath your feet, the faint sourness of fermented food stored in clay vessels along the walls, and beneath it all, the deep green scent of cedar bark woven into mats and hung in long strips to partition the interior into family spaces. The longhouse stretches before you and behind you, a tunnel of shadow and amber warmth that extends far beyond what the single smoke hole can illuminate. You count the hearths as your eyes adjust. 1, 2, 3, for each marking the territory of a family, each surrounded by low platforms built against the walls where people sleep and sit and work and live out the small intimacies of their days. The platforms are raised perhaps 1.5 feet above the ground, built from split cedar planks lashed to sturdy posts driven deep into the earth, and upon them rest layers of woven mats, some made from cattail reeds dried and softened, others from cedar bark pounded until it becomes almost like fabric, pliable and insulating. The mats are stacked in thicknesses you will come to understand as essential, each layer a deliberate choice against the cold that seeps up from the ground and down from the ceiling and in through every tiny gap in the walls. You are not a visitor here, not in this telling. You belong to the third hearth on the northern side, the one closest to the storage area where dried fish hang from racks and baskets of roots sit stacked in careful pyramids. Your mother's sister tends this hearth, and her husband, and their children, and you, and your grandmother who no longer walks easily, but whose hands still move with practiced certainty when she works cedar bark or weaves the cattails into new mats each spring. This is your place in the longhouse, your portion of the communal warmth and shelter, your responsibility to maintain and defend and contribute to through labor and respect and the small courtesies that make crowded living possible. The longhouse has no heating, not in the way you might imagine if you have lived your life with furnaces and radiators and the predictable warmth that flows from ducts at the turn of a dial. There is only fire, and fire is a living thing that demands constant attention. It must be fed carefully, not too much at once, or the smoke becomes unbearable and drives everyone outside with streaming eyes and coughing lungs. Not too little, or the embers die and leave you in darkness and cold that creeps in like water rising. The fire is communal property, each family responsible for maintaining their own hearth, while understanding that the heat from all 4 hearths combined creates the envelope of warmth that makes the longhouse livable when frost settles white and thick outside, and the river freezes solid enough to walk upon. You learn the fire as you learn language, through observation and participation, and the gentle corrections of those who have known it longer. You learn which wood burns hot and fast. The dry alder that snaps and pops and throws good heat but vanishes quickly into ash, and which burns slow and steady through the night. The dense fir and cedar heartwood that glows like a living coal and radiates warmth for hours without much flame. You learn to split the wood thin in winter, creating more surface area for the fire to grip, and to arrange the pieces in careful patterns that allow air to flow beneath and between, feeding oxygen to the embers without smothering them. You learn to bank the fire before sleep, covering the coals with ash and positioning 2 thick logs so they will burn inward toward each other through the long darkness, maintaining enough heat to keep the space above freezing without needing to be tended. The first night you truly understand how people slept here without what you once thought of as heating. You lie on your platform in the deep middle of winter, when the air outside is cold enough to make the trees crack and split with sounds like distant thunder. You have prepared your sleeping place with the care of ritual. First, the base layer of mats, 3 of them stacked directly on the platform boards to insulate from below, because the cold rises from the earth as surely as heat rises from flame. And without this barrier, the warmth would drain from your body all night long, pulled down into the ground as if the earth itself were drinking it. Then comes the sleeping mat, woven more finely than the base layers, soft enough that it does not scratch even the tender skin of children. And upon this you have placed 2 deerskins, tanned until they are supple and soft, still holding the lanolin that makes them faintly water-resistant and traps the warmth of your body like cupped hands hold water. You wear your daily clothes to sleep, the woven cedar bark tunic that hangs to your knees, the deerskin leggings that tie at the waist and wrap closely around your calves, the thick fur wrapping for your feet that your grandmother made from rabbit pelts stitched together with sinew, 30 or more rabbits contributing their small softness to keep your feet from going numb in the night. You do not think of these as pajamas or special sleeping garments. They are simply what you wear when the cold comes, day and night without distinction, because in winter there is no true warmth except what you create and carry with you. Beside you on the platform, your younger cousin is already settling in, and the 2 of you will sleep close tonight, not touching but near enough that the warmth of each body contributes to the warmth of the other, creating a shared envelope of heat beneath the coverings. This too is part of how people slept here, not alone in separate rooms behind closed doors, but together in carefully negotiated proximity, family members arranged by age and size and need, the coldest sleepers placed nearest the hearth, the warmest bodies positioned to share their heat with children or elders whose internal fires burned less steadily. Above you both, your mother's sister is unfolding the sleeping robes, the heavy coverings made from multiple deer hides stitched together and lined with the thick winter fur of bear, elk, and more deer, layered so the fur faces inward against your body and outward against the air, creating dead space between the layers where warmth accumulates and holds. These robes are communal property, too valuable and labor-intensive to belong to any individual. Your grandmother spent 3 winters making the one you sleep beneath, trading for hides and preparing them and stitching them with an awl and sinew thread, thousands of careful punctures and pulls until the separate pieces became a unified whole large enough to cover 3 people sleeping side by side. When you slip beneath the robe, pulling it up to your chin and tucking the edges carefully beneath your body to seal out drafts, you enter a different climate. The air against your face is still cool, visible in faint puffs of condensation when you exhale, but beneath the robe your body's heat is already beginning to accumulate, trapped by the layers of hide and fur and reflected back against your skin. You can feel your cousin's warmth as well, a gentle radiation from 2 feet away, and on your other side the larger, steadier heat of your mother's sister, who sleeps between you and the hearth to block any drafts that might slip across the platform during the night. The fire has been banked properly. You watched your grandmother do it as dusk fell, her hands moving with the economy of 10,000 repetitions, pushing the glowing coals into a compact mound and covering them with a thick layer of ash that will slow the burn and hold the heat down into the coals rather than letting it escape upward in flame and light. On top of the ash mound she placed 2 thick sections of fur, each as big around as your thigh, positioned like the open jaws of some great creature, their ends meeting over the buried coals. Through the night these logs will burn inward slowly, their dents wood breaking down into more coals that will keep the hearth alive until morning when the fire can be awakened again with kindling and breath. You lie still and listen to the longhouse settling into its night rhythms. At the far hearth, near the eastern door, you can hear the low murmur of conversation. Two men speaking in voices too quiet to distinguish words. Only the rise and fall of questions and answers, the occasional soft burst of laughter. Nearer, a baby fusses briefly and then quiets, comforted by the breast or the gentle rocking of a mother who has done this so many times she barely wakes to do it. Someone coughs, a thick productive sound that speaks of winter illness, the bronchial troubles that come when people live too long in smoke-filled air. Someone else shifts on their platform, the cedar boards creaking softly, the rustle of hide and fur as they resettle beneath their robes. The darkness is not complete. Through the smoke hole far above, you can see a small irregular patch of sky, deep blue going to black, and 3 bright stars visible in that limited frame. The smoke from all 4 hearths rises together, braiding and mingling, finding the opening and flowing out into the frozen night, and where it passes through the hole, the heat from below meets the cold from above and creates a faint shifting glow, almost like foxfire, a ghostly luminescence that traces the edges of the opening. Your eyes learn to see by this faint light, by the dull orange glow of the banked hearths, by the occasional brighter pulse when a log shifts and exposes fresh coals beneath the ash. You understand now that the longhouse is itself a kind of organism, breathing in cold air through the low gaps and breathing out warm smoke-laden air through the high opening, creating a gentle circulation that keeps the air from becoming completely stagnant while not creating drafts strong enough to strip away the precious heat. The smoke that you once might have found unbearable has become simply the smell of home, and your body has learned to tolerate it, your lungs filtering out the worst of the particles, your eyes no longer streaming unless the fire is fed badly and the smoke grows truly thick. The cold outside is absolute. You know this because you stepped out just before dark to relieve yourself in the designated area beyond the longhouse, and the air took your breath away, so cold it felt solid, like walking into a wall of ice. The ground was frozen iron hard, ringing beneath your footfalls, and frost was already forming on every surface, glittering in the last horizontal rays of the setting sun. Inside, by contrast, the air hovers somewhere well above freezing near the floor and warmer still at the height of the platforms and warmer again up near the ceiling beams where the heat collects before finding its way to the smoke hole. The gradient is steep, 10 degrees difference, perhaps more, between the floor and the sleeping platforms, another 10 degrees between the platforms and the roof. This is why you sleep on the raised platforms rather than on the ground, why the platforms are positioned along the walls rather than in the center where the heat is more diffuse, why the sleeping areas are partially enclosed by hanging mats that create smaller chambers within the larger space, trapping warmth and blocking drafts. Beneath your layered coverings, your body is doing its own work of heat generation. You have eaten well tonight, a thick stew of dried salmon, leached acorns ground into meal, root vegetables that spent the autumn stored in sand to keep them fresh, all of it flavored with dried herbs and sea salt traded from the coastal people. The food sits heavy and warm in your belly, and your body is burning it slowly, converting it into the heat that keeps your core temperature steady, that keeps your fingers and toes from going numb, that allows you to sleep without shivering. This is another kind of heating, one that happens inside your flesh, fueled by salmon fat and acorn oil and the dense calories of roots pulled from the earth before the first frost. Because you have been taught that sleeping is itself a form of conservation. When you sleep, your body requires less energy, burns its fuel more slowly, allows the warmth to accumulate rather than spending it on movement and thinking and all the metabolic demands of consciousness. In winter, people sleep longer, going to bed soon after dark because there is little point in burning lamp oil or torches when the work of the day is done, waking later because the cold makes movement difficult, and there is no urgency to begin the day before the sun has had a chance to warm the air outside even slightly. Sleep becomes a strategy for survival, a way of stretching food stores and staying warm without effort, a kind of voluntary hibernation practiced not for months at a time, but for an extra hour or 2 each end of the truncated winter day. Your grandmother lies on her platform near the hearth, the place of honor and necessity for one whose old bones feel the cold more keenly than yours. She has twice as many covering robes as you do, and beneath them she wears not just one layer of clothing but several. 2 tunics, extra leggings, a wrap of soft rabbit fur around her shoulders, mittens on her hands even as she sleeps. You can just make out her shape in the dimness, a small mounded form barely moving with her shallow breaths, conserving energy even in sleep, her body's metabolism turned down like a banked fire, just enough heat to maintain life but nothing wasted on excess. She will likely outlive the winter, barring illness or accident, because she knows all the small strategies of warmth, all the tricks of insulation and positioning and careful eating that keep the cold at bay. The longhouse was built with this in mind. Not just shelter from rain and wind, but a container for heat, a way of capturing and holding the small warmth that human bodies and cooking fires generate and keeping it close enough to be useful. The walls are thick, made from split cedar planks as wide as your arm span, overlapped like shingles so that water runs down without penetrating, and behind the inner planks is a layer of woven cedar bark mats that adds another barrier against the cold. The roof is similarly layered, planks and bark and more planks, pitched steeply so snow slides off rather than accumulating and crushing weight, and beneath the peak, just enough of an opening to let smoke out without letting too much heat escape or rain and snow fall directly onto the hearths below. The design is ancient, refined through generations of trial and error, of winters that killed those who built poorly and rewarded those who understood the principles of insulation and air flow and communal warmth. The longhouse you sleep in tonight is perhaps 40 years old, built when your grandmother was young, but it stands on the site of earlier longhouses going back beyond memory, each generation learning from the last, making small improvements, adjusting the height of the smoke hole, or the thickness of the walls, or the position of the hearths until the design reached a kind of perfection. A balance between the need for warmth and the need for breathable air, between the desire for space and the necessity of conserving heat. You shift slightly beneath your robes, adjusting your position to relieve a small pressure point where your hip presses against the platform. The movement releases a tiny puff of your accumulated body heat, which escapes from beneath the edge of the robe before you can tuck it back in, and you feel the immediate contrast, the cool air touching the skin of your neck, for just a moment before you seal the opening again. This teaches you to move minimally during the night, to find a comfortable position and hold it, because every adjustment costs heat, and heat is the currency of survival in the long dark cold. Across the longhouse, at the hearth opposite yours, you can hear someone adding wood to their fire. Not much, just a small piece to keep the embers alive, and you hear the soft scrape of the poker against stone, the faint crackle as new wood meets old coals. A brief glow brightens the interior, casting long shadows up the walls and across the ceiling beams, and then it fades again as the new wood begins its slow burn. No one complains about being woken by this necessary interruption. Everyone understands that the fires must be tended, that the warmth they provide is communal and essential, that the brief disturbance is nothing compared to what would happen if the fires were allowed to die completely, and everyone woke to a longhouse full of cold air, and the long difficult work of starting fires from scratch with friction or the careful preservation of embers brought from a neighboring longhouse. Your mind begins to drift in that peculiar way that precedes sleep, thoughts becoming less linear, images rising and fading without clear connection. You think of the river outside, frozen now but still flowing beneath the ice, the water so cold it would kill you in minutes if you fell through. You think of the deer whose hide covers you, wondering where it walked and what it ate, and how quickly it died when the hunter's arrow found its heart. You think of summer, still half a year away, when the longhouse will be too warm and people will sleep outside on platforms built in the open air, when the smoke hole will be opened wider, and the walls will seem too close and too dark after the long bright evenings, and the work that continues until the sun finally sets near the end of twilight. But that is then, and this is now, and now is cold and dark, and the small precious warmth of your sleeping place, the gentle weight of the robes holding you down like a loving hand, the sound of your cousins breathing deepening into sleep beside you, the solid presence of family all around you in the darkness, each person a small fire burning steadily through the night, each body contributing its tiny portion of heat to the collective warmth that makes survival possible. You become aware of your own breathing, the cool air entering your nose and warming as it passes through your sinuses, arriving in your lungs at nearly body temperature, then leaving again carrying moisture and heat that dissipates into the general atmosphere of the longhouse. Each breath is a tiny gift of warmth, multiplied by 30 or 40 people breathing together, a significant contribution to the ambient temperature. You think of this as a kind of magic, the way that simply being alive generates heat, the way that the body is itself a furnace burning food into warmth and motion and thought. The platforms around you are not empty spaces. Beneath them, in the shadowed areas between the supporting posts, are stored the belongings of each family, baskets of dried berries and roots, tools wrapped in hide to protect them from moisture, spare clothing, ceremonial objects, the accumulated material culture of lives lived in this place. These stored items also serve as insulation, creating barriers against drafts that might slip under the walls, adding mass that absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly through the night. Nothing in the Longhouse is single-purpose. Everything serves multiple functions because resources are limited and intelligence must compensate for what technology cannot provide. Above you, hanging from the beams, are more stored items: bundles of dried herbs, strings of dried fish, roots suspended in net bags, strips of dried elk meat, baskets of rendered fat sealed with pitch. The rising heat from the hearths keeps these stores dry and safe from mold, and their presence adds another layer of insulation between you and the cold roof. They also represent security, the knowledge that even if snow falls for weeks without break, even if hunting becomes impossible and the river is locked under 3 feet of ice, there is food here, enough to keep everyone alive until the season turns and the world becomes generous again. You feel sleep pulling at you now, that gentle, insistent tide that draws you down and away from conscious thought. You let it come, releasing the small tensions in your muscles one by one, allowing your jaw to relax and your shoulders to settle and your hands to uncurl from the fists you did not realize you were making. The darkness behind your closed eyelids is complete and velvety, and you sink into it gratefully, trusting that your body knows how to maintain its warmth without your conscious supervision, trusting that the Longhouse will hold through the night, trusting that morning will come, and with it the gradual return of light, and the wakening of the fires, and the continuation of life in this place, where people have learned to sleep through winter without any heating except what they create together, through design and knowledge, and the simple miracle of being alive. The last thing you are aware of before sleep takes you fully is the sound of wind rising outside, pressing against the Longhouse walls, seeking entry and finding none, and the corresponding sense of shelter, of being held safe inside while the world outside grows colder and more inhospitable. The Longhouse breathes around you, creaking slightly as the cold makes the wood contract, settling into its own kind of sleep, and you settle with it, another small warm creature in a warm den, waiting for dawn in the company of your people, in the place that has been made to keep you alive through the killing cold, one night at a time, one breath at a time, one shared heartbeat after another until winter finally releases its grip and the world remembers how to be warm again on its own. You wake in the depth of night, though you cannot say what hour it might be, only that the fire has burned lower than when you last closed your eyes and the cold has found new pathways through the layers of fur and wool that cover you. The darkness inside the Longhouse is not complete. It never is. Even at the darkest hour, the embers cast their faint orange glow across the nearest timbers, and your eyes, long accustomed to this perpetual dimness, can make out the shapes of the beams overhead, the bundles hanging from the rafters, the humped forms of sleepers on the platforms that line both walls. You lie still for a moment, listening to the chorus of breathing that fills the space, some steady and deep, others shallow and quick, a few punctuated by soft snores or the occasional murmur of dream speech. This is the sound of collective rest, the music of a community bound not only by kinship and labor, but by the simple shared necessity of enduring the cold season together, night after night, in this wooden vessel that floats through winter like a ship upon a frozen sea. The cold that woke you is subtle but insistent, a slow seeping chill that has worked its way beneath the edge of your sleeping furs where they meet the wall. You shift slightly, tucking the edge more firmly around your shoulder, feeling the immediate warmth of your own body heat recaptured in the space you have created. It is a small adjustment, one you have made countless times, as familiar as breathing. The art of sleeping warm in the Longhouse is not a single grand solution, but an accumulation of small attentions, a continuous conversation between your body and the cold, between the materials you have gathered and the relentless patience of winter. You think of the elders who taught you this, not through formal instruction but through observation, through the quiet modeling of competence that passes from one generation to the next like a flame carried carefully from hearth to hearth. Your grandmother, you remember, used to say that winter sleep was different from summer sleep, that in the warm months you could abandon yourself to rest, let your body go slack and drift wherever dreams might take you. But in winter you must sleep with one part of yourself always alert, always tending the small fire of your own warmth. She would demonstrate this awareness even in sleep, her hands occasionally emerging from beneath her furs to adjust a fold, to draw a grandchild closer, to smooth a wrinkle that might let drafts creep through. You never saw her shiver, never heard her complain of cold, though her sleeping place was no warmer than anyone else's. The difference, you came to understand, was not in her location or her materials, but in her constant, almost unconscious vigilance. The way she had internalized the requirements of winter rest until they became as natural as the beating of her heart. You practice that vigilance now, lying still but not rigid, letting your awareness spread through your body like water seeking its level. Your feet, bundled in wool wrappings and tucked into a small sack stuffed with dried grass, feel adequately warm, though you flex your toes inside their coverings to be certain, feeling the reassuring prickle of good circulation. Your legs are drawn up slightly, not fully curled, but bent enough that the furs can wrap around them completely, creating a small pocket of warmth rather than a long exposed surface. Your arms are tucked close to your torso, hands clasped loosely at your chest, where the heat from your core keeps them comfortable. This position, too, is something you learn through years of winter nights. The body compact but not tense, conserving its warmth through geometry as much as through insulation. Around you, the longhouse breathes. That is how you think of it. This building that is home to 30 or 40 souls, that shelters your family and the families connected to yours through marriage and alliance and the complex web of obligation that defines your people. The structure itself seems alive in the darkness, settling with small creaks as the temperature drops, the timber contracting with sounds like distant footsteps or soft speech. The bark covering groans occasionally under the weight of snow that has accumulated on the roof, and somewhere near the far end, you can hear the faint whistle of wind finding a gap, singing its thin song before losing itself in the vastness of the interior. These sounds, which might seem ominous to a stranger, are to you as familiar and comforting as the voices of family members, the known music of your world. You think about the strangers who sometimes come in autumn, traders from the south or emissaries from distant villages, and how they struggle their first nights in the longhouse. They sleep poorly, troubled by the darkness, by the proximity of so many bodies, by the sounds of communal rest. They wake often, disoriented, sometimes sitting up abruptly, their eyes wide in the dim firelight, until someone speaks to them softly, reminding them where they are, guiding them back into sleep. You remember being young enough that such visitors seemed exotic and slightly absurd, unable to master something as simple as sleeping. Now, with more winters behind you, you understand that what seems simple is actually deeply complex, a skill as sophisticated as tracking game or working stone, requiring knowledge that can only be acquired through experience, through the patient accumulation of cold nights and the small discoveries each one brings. The fire at the center of the longhouse draws your attention, as it always does eventually, that focal point around which everything else arranges itself. From where you lie, you can see two of the hearths. There are several spaced along the central corridor, each one shared by the families whose platforms face it from either side. The nearer fire has burned down to a bed of coals, still glowing with that deep inner heat that seems more profound than flame, more essential. Someone has banked it well before the household settled into deep sleep, arranging the larger pieces of wood so they burn slowly, releasing their energy across hours rather than minutes. This is work that appears simple but requires judgment born of long practice. Too much fuel, and the fire burns hot but brief, leaving the coldest hours before dawn unguarded. Too little, and it dies completely, forcing someone to rise and rebuild it from scratch, a difficult task in the depth of night, and one that fills the longhouse with smoke as new wood kindles. You can see, even from this distance, that the fire has been banked by someone skilled, probably old Håkon, whose platform is nearest this hearth, and who takes pride in his fire tending, who seems to wake periodically through the night as if summoned by some internal sense that the flames need attention. You have watched him work, have seen how he places the logs in careful relationship to one another, creating channels for air to flow, building structure into what seems like simple burning. He explained it to you once, comparing the arrangement of fuel to the building of the longhouse itself. You must think about how everything supports everything else, how the spaces between are as important as the materials themselves, how the whole must be greater than the sum of its parts if it is to fulfill its purpose through the long night. As if summoned by your thoughts, you see movement near that hearth, a dark shape rising from the sleeping platform. It is indeed Håkon, or at least you assume so from the location and the smooth, unhurried quality of the movement. The way this person knows exactly where they are even in darkness, moving without fumbling or hesitation. You watch as he kneels beside the fire. The figure is definitely masculine now that you can see the silhouette more clearly, and reaches for wood from the stack that is kept nearby, always within arm's reach of the hearth. He selects pieces carefully. You can tell from the deliberate quality of his movements, the way he hefts each one briefly before deciding. Then he places them on the coals, not all at once but in sequence, waiting between each addition, giving the fire time to accept each new piece before offering another. The flames, which had retreated into the coals like animals into burrows, begin to emerge again, tentative at first, small yellow tongues licking up the sides of the fresh wood, then with growing confidence, until there is real flame again, bright enough that you can see Hawken's face in profile, seamed and weathered like old bark, completely tranquil as he watches his work. He stays there for several minutes, ensuring the fire has truly caught, that it will not merely flare and die, but will settle into sustained burning. Only when he is satisfied does he return to his sleeping place, moving with that same unhurried certainty, and you hear the soft sound of furs being rearranged. Then nothing, his breathing lost in the general susurration of the Longhouses' rest. This small drama, witnessed in near silence and dim light, fills you with a feeling you cannot quite name, something between gratitude and wonder, a recognition of the countless small acts of tending that make survival possible, that allow you to sleep with some measure of warmth and security. Hawken will likely perform this service several more times before dawn, rising as needed, never completely, never with the full weight of waking, moving through his task in that state between sleep and consciousness that experienced winter dwellers learn to inhabit, a kind of restful vigilance. In the morning he will not speak of this work, will not expect thanks or recognition, because it is simply what one does, part of the great web of reciprocal care that binds the Longhouse into a single functioning whole. You let your eyes close again, feeling sleep beginning to return, that gentle undertow that pulls you down into darkness. But before you surrender to it, you perform your own small act of tending, reaching down to adjust the fur that covers the child sleeping beside you. Your daughter, small and warm, who generates heat like a little furnace, but who kicks off her coverings in sleep, who would wake shivering if not for your periodic adjustments. You draw the fur back over her shoulders, tucking it carefully around her neck, feeling the warmth of her breath against your hand. She murmurs something wordless and presses closer to you, and you curve your body slightly to accommodate her, creating a sheltered space where she can rest secure. This, too, is part of the knowledge that sustains life through winter nights. The way bodies can share warmth, the way the young and old, who struggle most with cold, can be protected by proximity to those in their prime. The sleeping arrangements in the Longhouse reflect this understanding. The very young and the very old sleep in the middle positions, flanked by adults who buffer them from the coldest air. Married couples often sleep with children between them, creating pools of warmth that everyone shares. Adolescents and young adults, whose bodies run hottest, sometimes sleep in the positions nearest the walls, where they serve as insulation for those more vulnerable to cold. No one has written these arrangements into law or even perhaps articulated them consciously, but they persist across generations because they work, because they represent accumulated wisdom about the management of collective warmth. You drift for a while in that space between waking and sleep, aware of sounds and sensations but not fully conscious, not thinking in the ordinary sense, but rather experiencing a kind of diffuse awareness that spreads through the darkness like cream through water. You are aware of your daughter's breathing, of the fire's quiet crackling, of the cold air on your face, the only part of you exposed to the full chill of the night, and of the contrasting warmth of your body beneath the furs. You are aware, too, of the passage of time, not measured in hours or minutes, but in the slow rhythm of the fire's breathing, the gradual shift of your own body's temperature as sleep deepens, the way the quality of darkness itself seems to change as night moves through its invisible arc. Somewhere in the Longhouse, a baby cries, that sudden sharp sound that pierces through layers of sleep and darkness. You hear movement, the soft voices of parents soothing, and within moments the crying stops, replaced by the gentler sound of nursing, the small contented noises that infants make when feeding. This, too, is part of the night's music, as familiar as the fire's crackle or the wind's whisper. In the Longhouse, birth and death, sickness and health, sorrow and joy all happen within earshot of everyone, creating a kind of enforced intimacy that shapes your understanding of what it means to be human, to be part of a family, a clan, a people. There is no privacy in the sense that later peoples will understand the term, no locked doors or soundproofed walls. And this means that everyone shares in everyone's life, that children grow up understanding the full range of human experience not through explanation, but through simple proximity. You remember when your daughter was an infant, how you learned to nurse her in the night without fully waking, how your body developed the ability to respond to her needs while remaining in that suspended state between sleep and consciousness. Other mothers taught you, not through words but through example, showing you how to arrange your furs so you could open them easily in the night, how to position the baby so she could feed without either of you having to sit up, how to do all of this while remaining warm, remaining essentially at rest. It seemed impossibly difficult at first, a kind of magic that you could never master, but gradually your body learned what your mind could not quite grasp, and you found yourself able to move through these nighttime feedings with barely a ripple in the surface of your sleep. The knowledge required to sleep through winter, you understand now, is not primarily intellectual. It cannot be learned from description or explanation, cannot be written down and passed on through words alone. It is knowledge that lives in the body, in the muscles and nerves and tissues, knowledge that accumulates through repetition and adjustment, through cold nights and the small discoveries each one brings. Your hands know how to arrange furs for maximum warmth without conscious thought. Your body knows how to curl into the most heat-conserving position. Your skin has learned to tolerate the cold air on your face, has thickened slightly in response to years of exposure, developing its own defense against the chill. Even your breathing has adapted, becoming slower and deeper in sleep, warming the air more thoroughly before it reaches your lungs, extracting more oxygen from each breath so you can remain deeply at rest without suffocating beneath heavy coverings. Time passes, though you could not say how much. The baby has fallen silent again, returned to sleep. The fire that Håkon tended has settled into steady burning, its light dim but constant. Around you, the sleepers sleep, each in their own way, some deeply and some lightly, some peacefully and some troubled by dreams. You can tell who is who sometimes by the quality of their breathing. Your brother-in-law, whose sleep is always restless, who shifts and mutters. Your aunt, who sleeps so quietly and still that sometimes you need to listen carefully to be sure she is breathing at all. The twins who live at the far end, who sometimes laugh in their sleep, a sound both eerie and delightful in the darkness. You find yourself thinking about summer, about how different sleep is when warmth comes from the sun rather than from fire and furs and the careful preservation of body heat. In summer, the longhouse is almost too warm at night, the heat of the day trapped in the timber and bark, radiating inward through the dark hours. People sleep with minimal covering, sometimes with none at all, and the doors at either end of the structure are left open to encourage whatever breeze might wander through. Children sleep outside on warm nights, clustered together on bark mats, looking up at stars, listening to night birds and the sounds of the forest coming alive in darkness. Summer sleep is easier, less demanding, requiring no particular skill or vigilance. And for that reason it is also less satisfying, less precious. You do not think about summer sleep, do not remember individual summer nights the way you remember winter ones, because summer asks so little of you that there is no triumph in successful rest, no sense of having achieved something difficult and necessary. Winter sleep, by contrast, is an accomplishment. Each night that you close your eyes in cold and wake in relative comfort represents a small victory over the world's indifference, a successful application of knowledge and preparation and communal effort. The cold is always there, patient and implacable, waiting for mistakes, for lapses in attention, for the failure of fire or furs or the careful arrangements that keep warmth gathered close. Against this constant pressure, you and your people maintain your small pocket of survivable conditions, this wooden shell that holds heat the way a cupped hand holds water, imperfectly, with constant loss that must be constantly replenished. The knowledge of how to do this, how to sleep through cold and wake unharmed, is perhaps the most essential knowledge your people possess, more fundamental than knowing how to hunt or farm or build. Because without successful rest there can be no labor, no life, no continuation into the next day and the next season. You shift slightly, adjusting your position, feeling your body settling into deeper rest. Your breathing slows, matching itself to the rhythm of the longhouse's collective respiration. The cold on your face no longer bothers you. It has become simply one more sensation, no more disturbing than the pressure of the furs or the hardness of the platform beneath you. You are warm enough, comfortable enough, and that is sufficient. In the longhouse, comfort is not about luxury but about adequacy, about having enough warmth to sleep, enough food to live, enough shelter to survive. This modest sufficiency is what you strive for, what your days of labor and preparation are designed to achieve, and tonight, like most nights, you have achieved it. Your daughter makes a small sound in her sleep, and without thinking you draw her closer, your body responding to her need before your mind has even registered it. This automatic caregiving, this way that parents serve their children even in sleep, is another piece of the complex puzzle of winter survival. The Longhouse shelters not just individuals but families, not just families but a whole network of relationships and obligations. You care for your daughter, but you also care for your nephew sleeping on the other side of you, for your aging mother on the platform behind you, for the cousin who recently lost her husband and now sleeps alone with her 3 children in the space across the corridor. This care is not always direct or dramatic. Most often it is small and quiet, a matter of tending fires, sharing furs, making sure that everyone has what they need to make it through the night. And others care for you in turn, in ways you sometimes notice, and in ways you likely never see. Someone, probably your brother, made sure there was extra wood stacked near your sleeping place before the snow grew too deep. Someone else, perhaps your sister-in-law, reinforced the bark covering on the wall behind your platform, blocking a draft you had complained of. The young men of the Longhouse, in their pride and vigor, take on the coldest, hardest work, rising before dawn to break ice and haul water, to check trap lines, to do all the tasks that require full strength in bitter cold. And by doing this they spare the old and young, the sick and weak. The old women, in their turn, maintain the knowledge that makes survival possible, teaching the young how to preserve food, how to prepare skins, how to recognize the signs of cold sickness and treat them before they become dangerous. Every person contributes according to their capacity, and every person receives according to their need. And this is how the Longhouse persists through winter, through the succession of winters that make up a lifetime. The darkness is beginning to change quality, though dawn is still far off. You sense this more than see it, a subtle shift in the texture of the night, the way the cold seems to deepen slightly, the way the sleepers settle more heavily into their rest. This is the deepest part of night, the hours when the body's temperature drops to its lowest point, when the old and sick are most vulnerable, when those who will not survive until morning most often slip away. It is also the time when sleep is deepest, when dreams come in their strangest and most vivid forms, when the boundary between sleep and death seems thinnest. Your people have stories about these hours, about the spirits that walk through the Longhouse while humans sleep, about the journeys that souls take in dreams, traveling far from the body while it rests. You do not fear these stories, though you respect them. The Longhouse, with its darkness and its collective sleep, is a place where the boundaries of ordinary life seem more permeable, where the unseen world presses close. But it is also a place of profound human warmth, of care and connection, and you have learned that these are stronger protections than any wall or door. The spirits may walk, but so do the living, tending their fires and their children, maintaining the small vigilances that keep life going. In the contest between darkness and warmth, between cold and care, you are on the side of warmth and care, and that is no small thing. Håkon rises again. You are aware of it without opening your eyes, some part of you tracking his movement, and tends the fire. You hear the soft sounds of wood being placed, the gentle stirring of coals. The fire accepts his offering, grows a little brighter, a little warmer, and you feel the wave of heat reach you even at this distance, a subtle increase in the ambient temperature, barely noticeable but real. These small additions of fuel, repeated throughout the night, are what keep the Longhouse habitable, what make the difference between uncomfortable cold and dangerous cold. Håkon's vigilance, multiplied across all the fire tenders in the Longhouse, creates the conditions in which everyone else can sleep with some measure of security. You wonder, in that drifting way that thoughts come in near sleep, who will take on this role when Håkon grows too old, when his ability to wake and tend and return to sleep becomes too difficult, too demanding for his aging body. Probably his son, who already helps with the work, who has been learning through observation and occasional practice, developing the internal clock and the fire sense that the work requires. This, too, is how knowledge passes from one generation to the next. Not through formal teaching, but through gradual immersion, through years of sleeping near someone who knows how to do what needs doing, absorbing their competence almost unconsciously until one day you realize you have become skilled yourself. Your daughter shifts against you, and you adjust automatically, maintaining the warm pocket of air you have created together. She is learning, though she does not know it, how to sleep through winter. Her body is learning to recognize cold, to respond to it, to seek warmth and maintain it. She is learning the sounds of the Longhouse, the feeling of sleeping among many people, the sense of security that comes from being part of something larger than yourself. When she is grown, when she has children of her own to keep warm through winter nights, She will draw on this learning without even realizing she is doing so, will arrange furs and tend fires and comfort children using knowledge she absorbed through her skin in these years of sleeping beside you. The thought fills you with a quiet contentment, a sense of being part of something that extends far beyond your individual life. You are a link in a chain that stretches back through time, back through generations of winter sleepers, each one learning from the one before, each one contributing some small refinement or innovation that makes survival a little more likely, a little less precarious. The way you arrange your sleeping place, the particular combination of materials you use, the small adjustments you make through the night. All of this is built on knowledge that your grandmother's grandmother possessed, modified by your grandmother's experience, shaped by your mother's adaptations, and now passing through you to your daughter, who will carry it forward into a future you will not live to see. This chain is more precious than any material wealth, more durable than any building. The longhouse itself will eventually decay, its timbers rotting, its bark covering failing, until it must be abandoned and rebuilt elsewhere. The furs and hides you wrap yourself in will wear out, will be replaced by new ones. Even the tools you use and the vessels you eat from will break eventually, will need to be remade. But the knowledge of how to survive winter, how to sleep through cold, how to maintain the small fire of human life against the patient darkness. This knowledge persists, carried in bodies and memories, in hands that know how to work and minds that know how to watch and learn. This is your true inheritance and your true legacy. Sleep pulls at you more strongly now, its current irresistible. You let yourself sink into it, trusting in the furs that cover you, the fire that burns steadily, the walls that shelter you, the people who sleep around you. You trust in your own body's wisdom, in its ability to maintain itself through the night, to wake you if necessary, to keep the small flame of your warmth burning until dawn. You trust in the accumulated knowledge of your people, in the soundness of the longhouse's construction, in the adequacy of your preparations. This trust is what makes deep sleep possible, what allows you to surrender consciousness without fear. The last thing you are aware of before sleep takes you completely is the sound of breathing, that great chorus of human rest that fills the darkness. Each breath is different, each sleeper unique, and yet together they create a kind of harmony, a collective rhythm that rises and falls like waves on a shore. You add your own breathing to this chorus, letting it slow and deepen, letting yourself become part of the greater whole. And then there is nothing but the darkness and the warmth and the long slow pull of sleep, carrying you down into depths where there are no thoughts, no sensations, only the deep rest that the body requires and the winter night allows, here in the longhouse, here in the heart of winter, here in the careful space that humans have carved from the cold world's indifference. You have learned now that sleep in the longhouse is not a single thing, but many things woven together, that it shifts with the seasons and the weather and the particular needs of each night. And tonight you understand this more deeply than ever before, because tonight is different from all the nights that have come before it in this long winter. Tonight the cold has arrived with a weight that presses against the walls, that seeps through every gap in the bark, that makes the fire seem smaller than it has ever seemed. And you know as you prepare your sleeping place that this will be a night of testing, a night when all the small knowledge you have gathered will be called upon, when the old ways will either hold you safe or fail you. The elders noticed the change before midday, the way the light took on a particular quality, thin and sharp, the way the wind shifted to come from the north with a voice that spoke of the deep cold, the cold that comes from the endless forests and the frozen lakes beyond. And they began immediately to make preparations, sending the young ones to gather more wood, instructing the women to check every sleeping platform, every fur, every woven mat, to ensure that nothing was left to chance. You watched them move through the longhouse with purposeful calm, their movements efficient and sure, and you understood that this calm was itself a form of knowledge, a way of facing the cold without fear but also without foolishness, acknowledging its power while refusing to be mastered by it. Now as evening settles and the temperature continues to fall, you can feel the difference in the very air of the longhouse, the way it seems to contract, to draw inward, the way even the smoke from the fire moves differently, hanging lower, reluctant to rise through the smoke holes where the bitter cold waits. The fire has been built larger than usual, fed with the driest wood, the kind that burns hot and long, and around it the family gathers closer than on ordinary nights, not yet ready to retreat to the sleeping platforms, needing first to absorb as much warmth as possible, to let it sink deep into bones and muscles, to store it like provisions against the long dark hours ahead. Your grandmother sits nearest the fire, her face illuminated by the flames, and she is telling a story, her voice steady and rhythmic. And you realize that this too is part of the preparation. That stories on nights like this serve a purpose beyond entertainment. That they draw the family together, create a circle of shared attention that itself generates a kind of warmth, a human heat that has nothing to do with fire. She speaks of a winter long ago, when she was young, when a cold even more severe than this one descended on the village, and how the people survived it through vigilance and cooperation, and the steady application of all the knowledge passed down through generations. You listen to her words, but you are also aware of the other preparations happening around you. The way your mother is heating stones at the edge of the fire, large smooth river stones that will hold warmth for hours. The way your father is adjusting the bark panels along the outer wall, plugging gaps with dried moss. The way your uncle is checking the supply of wood stacked near each hearth, ensuring that no one will need to venture far into the cold longhouse during the night to find fuel. Each action is small, but together they form a web of care, a collective effort to make the space as secure as possible against what is coming. When the time finally arrives to move to the sleeping platforms, there is a deliberateness to it, a choreography that everyone understands. The youngest children go first, bundled and carried by their mothers, settled into the center of the family's sleeping area where the warmth is greatest, where they will be surrounded on all sides by older bodies. You help your sister arrange the furs for them, creating a nest, a den within the den, and you remember doing this same thing last winter, and the winter before, how each time you have learned something new, some small refinement, the way this fur should overlap that one, the way a certain type of grass mat beneath the furs provides an extra layer of insulation without adding bulk. Your sleeping place tonight is between your brother and your cousin, in the tier of the platform that is neither highest nor lowest, in the zone where the warmth from the fire below can still reach you, but where you are also sheltered by those sleeping above. You have arranged your furs differently tonight, adding an extra layer beneath you because you know from experience that the cold comes from below as well as from above, that the wooden platform itself can draw warmth from your body if it is not properly insulated. The bottom layer is a thick bare fur, hair side down, creating a barrier between you and the wood, then a woven mat that your grandmother made tight and dense, then a deer hide, soft and pliable, and finally the sleeping furs that will cover you, each one chosen for specific properties. The first of these covering furs is beaver, water-resistant and dense, almost impossibly warm for its weight, and you have placed it hair side toward your body, so that when you lie down you will feel that particular silkiness against your skin, that immediate sense of being held. Over this goes a larger elk hide, heavy and substantial, big enough to tuck around you on all sides, to create a sealed envelope of warmth. And finally, to be pulled up only if the cold becomes too severe, a wolf pelt, thick and wild-smelling still, despite many weeks of use. The fur so dense that your fingers disappear into it when you touch it. Between the furs you have placed the heated stones that your mother prepared, wrapped carefully in leather so they will not burn you, positioned at your feet and along your sides, and the warmth radiating from them is immediate and profoundly comforting, a gift from the fire, a way of carrying the hearth itself into your sleeping place. You know that this warmth will fade during the night, that by morning the stones will be cool, but you know also that they will do their work in the crucial early hours, that they will help you descend into sleep while your body is still adjusting to the reduced temperature, that they will buy you the time you need to find the deep sleep that sustains itself, that generates its own warmth. Your brother settles in beside you, and without speaking you adjust your positions so that you are close, not touching exactly, but near enough that you will share warmth, that the small pocket of air between you will be heated by both your bodies and will serve both of you. On your other side your cousin does the same, and you feel the three of you becoming a unit, a collective source of heat, and you understand why the sleeping platforms are arranged as they are, why no one sleeps alone, why even adults pair and cluster, why the entire structure of sleeping in the longhouse is designed around this principle of shared warmth, of bodies as hearths, of human heat as technology. Before you pull the furs up completely, you look out across the longhouse one more time, and what you see is a space transformed. The high central aisle, now nearly empty except for the fires and the few elders who will tend them during the night, taking shifts, ensuring that the flames never die completely, adding wood when needed, monitoring the temperature and the wind and the state of the smoke holes. Along both sides of the structure, the sleeping platforms are full, every family clustered in their designated area, layers of furs creating a landscape of dark mounds, occasional movements visible as people make final adjustments, children being settled, infants being nursed one last time before the long night. The light from the fires is gentler now, dimmer, as the flames are allowed to settle into the steady burn that will last until morning, and this gentler light softens everything, makes the longhouse seem almost dreamlike, a vessel of warmth floating in an ocean of cold. And you feel a profound gratitude for this structure, these walls, this roof, this collective human effort that stands between you and the killing cold outside. You think about the people who built this longhouse, the knowledge that went into its design, the countless generations of trial and error that determined its proportions, the placement of the hearths, the angle of the sleeping platforms, the size of the smoke holes. Every detail refined through experience, through winters survived and winters that taught hard lessons. The cold presses harder now against the outer walls, and you can hear it, a subtle creaking, the sound of bark contracting, of lashings tightening, of the whole structure responding to the temperature, settling into itself. From somewhere outside comes a sharp crack, a tree splitting in the frost, the sound sudden and loud and somehow final. And then silence again, a silence that is itself a presence, a weight, the silence of a frozen world where nothing moves that does not have to move, where all life has retreated inward, into burrows and dens and hollow trees and structures like this one, seeking shelter, seeking survival. You pull the furs up now, bringing them close around you, feeling their weight settle onto your body, and there is a ritual quality to this action, a sense of crossing a threshold, of committing yourself to sleep, to the vulnerability that sleep requires, trusting in these furs and these people around you, and this building and all the accumulated knowledge that makes this night survivable. The beaver fur is against your cheek now, soft and dense, and you breathe in its smell, animal and clean, a smell that is already associated in your mind with warmth and safety, with countless other nights of good sleep. Your body begins to relax, muscle by muscle, starting with your feet, warmed by the wrapped stones, moving up through your legs and your torso, and you help this process along by breathing slowly, deeply, the way your grandmother taught you, each breath drawing in the warm air beneath the furs, each exhale releasing tension, releasing the day, creating a rhythm that your heartbeat begins to match, a rhythm that is itself calming, that signals to every part of you that it is time now, that the work of the day is done, that the night's work is simply to rest, to maintain warmth, to sleep. Around you the sounds of the longhouse are changing, becoming the sounds of night, of settlement, of people finding comfort. The murmur of final conversations fades into silence, the movements still, the occasional cough or shift of position becoming isolated events in the growing quiet. The fires crackle softly, steadily, and you can hear them clearly now that other sounds have diminished, and you find yourself listening to them, following the patterns of pops and hisses, the way a particular log will burn silently for a long time, and then suddenly speak, sending up a shower of sparks that briefly illuminate the smoke-darkened ceiling before fading. One of the elders is singing very quietly, more of a hum than actual words, a melody that rises and falls like breathing, like waves, and you think it might be your grandfather, his voice worn smooth by years but still strong, still certain, and the song is old, older than anyone can remember, a song for cold nights, a song that is meant to accompany sleep, to bridge the space between waking and dreaming. You let it carry you, let it become part of the darkness behind your closed eyes. Let it merge with the sound of the fire and the slow breathing of your brother beside you and the beat of your own heart in your ears. The warmth beneath the furs is building now, becoming an environment, a microclimate created by your body and maintained by the insulation around you. And you marvel at this as you have marveled before, at how these dead skins, these furs from animals that once walked and breathed and generated their own heat, can trap and hold the heat you generate, can create a space so warm that you can forget almost that beyond these layers the air is cold, that beyond the walls of the longhouse the night is dangerous, that without these simple technologies you would not survive. It is not the furs themselves that warm you. You know this, your grandmother explained it carefully when you were young. It is your own body's heat, your own fire, and the furs simply keep it close, keep it from escaping into the vast cold that would drink it endlessly and never be satisfied. You shift slightly, finding the exact position that works for this night, for this configuration of furs and stones and bodies. And it is different from last night, and will be different from tomorrow night, because each night is unique. Each night requires its own small adjustments, its own particular arrangement of all the variables. Tonight you find that lying on your side with your knees drawn up slightly works best, creates the smallest volume of air to heat beneath the furs, allows you to tuck the beaver fur under your chin, lets you feel the solid warmth of the heated stone against your feet, while also being aware of your brother's presence behind you, his breathing already deepening into sleep. Through the furs you can still sense the light from the fires, a faint orange glow that penetrates even these layers, and you watch it with half-closed eyes, seeing it pulse gently as your eyelids droop and lift, each time staying closed a little longer, each time requiring more effort to open again. The light becomes diffuse, abstract, becomes simply warmth made visible, becomes the last thing you see before you stop seeing altogether, before you slip across that invisible border between waking and sleeping, between the conscious management of warmth and the body's automatic regulation of itself, between the world as you know it and the world of dreams. But even as you sleep, part of you remains aware, dimly, of where you are and what you are doing, that deep animal part that has kept humans alive through countless winters, that monitors temperature and air quality and danger even while consciousness rests. You will shift during the night without waking, adjusting the furs, moving closer to or farther from your brother, depending on what your sleeping body decides it needs. And you will do this smoothly, efficiently, the way someone who has slept this way their entire life learns to do, the way your grandmother still does in her 70s, the way your infant nephew already does without instruction, because it is knowledge that lives in the body, not the mind, knowledge that is older than language. In your dreams you are walking through snow, but you are not cold. The sun is shining and the snow is bright, almost painful to look at, and you are following tracks, animal tracks, and you know somehow that you will find what you are seeking, that the tracks will lead somewhere important, somewhere necessary, and there is no urgency in this dream, no fear, just steady progress through a white landscape that extends in all directions, limitless and clean. The snow crunches beneath your feet with each step, a satisfying sound, and you can feel the cold air in your lungs, but it is invigorating, not threatening, and you understand that this is what cold is supposed to be, something you move through, something you are equipped to handle, not something that traps you or defeats you. In the waking world, the night deepens and the cold intensifies, reaching a peak sometime in the hours before dawn, the darkest hours, the hours when the Earth's stored warmth has dissipated and the sun is still far from returning. And this is when the Longhouse faces its greatest test, when the fires burn lowest, when bodies have been still for hours and generate less heat, when even the best sleeping arrangements are challenged. But the Longhouse holds, the furs hold, the knowledge holds, because this is exactly what they were designed for, this specific trial, this particular enemy. Your grandfather wakes for his turn tending the fires, rising from his sleeping place with care not to disturb his wife, moving through the cold central aisle in moccasins and a heavy fur draped over his shoulders. And he is alert despite the hour, despite his age, because he knows how important this task is, how much depends on his vigilance. He checks each fire in turn, adding wood where needed, larger pieces that will burn slowly, that will carry the hearth through to morning, and he adjusts the smoke holes slightly, balancing the need for draft against the loss of heat, making calculations that he has made 10,000 times, that his father taught him, that his grandfather taught his father, knowledge that is practiced until it becomes instinct. He pauses at the central fire, the largest one, and stands for a moment warming his hands, looking out across the sleeping platforms, seeing the mounded shapes of his family, his people, all of them trusting that they will wake in the morning, trusting that the cold will not reach them. And he feels the weight of this trust, the responsibility of it, but he feels also the confidence that comes from knowing he is part of a chain, that he is doing what countless men before him have done, that he is using tools and techniques that have been proven across generations, that he is not facing this challenge alone but backed by all the accumulated wisdom of his people. He feeds the fire and watches it catch, watches the flames rise and brighten, pushing back the darkness, pushing back the cold, and then he returns to his sleeping place, to his wife's warmth, and sleeps again, his shift complete. You surface briefly from deep sleep, coming up just far enough to register that you are comfortable, that you are warm, that something during the night has gone exactly right. And then you sink back down, back into darkness and dreams. And in this new dream you are in the Longhouse, but it is summer, the walls are open, air flows freely through, and people are moving about in light clothing, working and talking and laughing, and you can smell cooking food and fresh grass and the river, and there is a sense of abundance, of ease, of the cold being not just absent but unimaginable. And you know even in the dream that this is how the year turns, that this winter will pass as all winters pass, that the cold is temporary even when it feels eternal, That survival is not just about enduring, but about knowing that there is something beyond endurance, that there are other seasons waiting. The darkness begins to change, subtle at first, a shift more felt than seen, the quality of the cold altering as dawn approaches, as the sun, still below the horizon, begins to send its first influence into the world, and the Longhouse responds to this change in ways too small to name but real nonetheless, a slight easing, a sense of the worst being past, of having come through. The fires have burned all night and still burn now, lower than they were but steady, faithful, and the elders who tended them have done their work well, maintaining the balance, keeping the space just warm enough, just safe enough, the temperature never falling below the critical threshold where sleep becomes impossible, where warmth cannot be maintained even beneath the furs. On the sleeping platforms, people begin the long, slow return to waking, bodies stirring, breathing changing rhythm, consciousness returning gradually, cautiously, checking conditions before committing fully to being awake. You become aware first of warmth, of being comfortable, and this is a small miracle, a victory, because you remember the cold of last evening, the severity of the night that was predicted, and yet you have slept well, deeply, and your body feels rested rather than stressed, feels that it has been safe rather than besieged. You move your toes inside the furs, testing, and find that even your feet, your extremities, the parts most vulnerable to cold, are comfortable, the stones long since cooled but the fur arrangement having held enough warmth through the night to keep you secure. You lie still for a while longer, unwilling to leave the warmth you have created, and around you the Longhouse is coming to life but slowly, respectfully, no one rushing, everyone allowing themselves these final moments beneath the furs before facing the day. You can hear your mother speaking softly to one of your younger siblings, her voice tender, encouraging, preparing the child for the transition from sleep to waking. And you remember her using this same voice with you when you were small, the way she would help you understand that waking was nothing to fear, that the day would be good, that the cold could be managed, that life continued beyond the warm nest of sleep. When you finally push the furs back and sit up, the air strikes you immediately, cool against your face, your hands, the parts of you that emerge first from the covering warmth, and it is indeed cold. The fire has kept the space survivable but not comfortable, not without the furs, and you reach quickly for the clothes you left nearby, the day layers that you will wrap yourself in, the practical garments that will allow you to move and work while still maintaining warmth. You dress quickly, efficiently, pulling on leggings and a tunic and a vest of rabbit fur, each piece adding insulation, creating a portable version of the layered warmth you had while sleeping, and by the time you are fully dressed you are already adjusting, already functional, ready to face the day. Around the fires, people are gathering, drawn to the central warmth, and someone has placed a large pot of water to heat, preparing for the morning meal, and the sight of this, the simple domestic activity, is reassuring, is normal, is a declaration that the night is over, that the cold was faced and survived, that life goes on in its patterns. You make your way down from the sleeping platform, your feet finding the familiar holds without thought, and you join the others near the fire, holding your hands toward the flames, feeling the direct heat on your palms and face. So different from the enclosed warmth of the furs, more immediate, more intense, almost aggressive in its contrast to the cold air around it. Your grandfather is there, looking tired but satisfied, and he nods to you in greeting, a small gesture that somehow conveys approval, recognition that you are learning, that you are becoming someone who can be relied upon to face winter with competence and calm. Your grandmother appears with an armload of wood, feeding one of the smaller fires, keeping all the hearths alive, keeping the warmth distributed throughout the space. And you move to help her, taking some of the wood, learning through action the morning routine, the way the Longhouse transitions from night configuration to day configuration, from sleeping vessel to living workspace. Outside, through the gaps in the walls, you can see that dawn has arrived, gray and cold, the world frozen and still, everything covered in the white frost that forms on nights like the one just passed, the trees glazed with it, the ground hard as stone, and you are grateful again for the walls between you and that world, for the knowledge that has created this shelter, for the community that maintains it. You know that later today someone will need to venture out, to check the wood supply, to break ice on the water source, to attend to the necessary tasks that winter requires. But for now everyone is staying close to the fires, warming themselves, eating, talking quietly, recovering from the trial of the night. The morning meal is simple but deeply satisfying, cornmeal porridge with dried berries stirred in, the sweetness of the berries cutting through the blandness of the corn, and you eat slowly, letting the warm food fill you. letting it build internal heat to complement the external heat of the fire and the clothes, and you feel strength returning, energy rising. The slight depletion that even a good night's sleep in cold conditions produces being gradually reversed. Around you, the family eats together, and there is conversation now, people sharing how they slept, making small jokes about snoring or stolen furs or cold feet. And this humor is important. It keeps the mood light. It prevents the weight of winter from becoming oppressive. It reminds everyone that they are in this together, that community is itself a form of warmth. Your father stands and announces that today will be a day for staying inside as much as possible, for working on tasks that can be done near the fires, for mending tools and repairing clothes and telling stories, for conserving energy and warmth, for acknowledging that yesterday's cold was serious and that today's cold, though diminishing, still commands respect. There is no argument with this plan. Everyone understands the wisdom of it, the way that knowing when to push forward and when to rest is part of surviving winter, part of making it through to spring without exhausting the body's reserves or the community's resources. You spend the morning helping your aunt repair a section of bark wall that has loosened during the cold night, working carefully to secure it without creating gaps that will let in drafts, and the work is satisfying, practical, a contribution to the collective security that you can see and touch. She teaches you as you work, explaining how the bark overlaps, how the binding is tied, how to test for soundness, and you realize that this is yet another form of knowledge being passed on, that every task in and around the Longhouse is an opportunity for learning, that winter is not just a time to survive but a time to deepen understanding, to become more skilled, more capable, more prepared for the winters that will come in all the years ahead. By midday, the temperature has risen enough that the Longhouse feels almost comfortable. The fires have been burning for hours and have warmed not just the air but the structure itself, the platforms, the posts, the walls, so that everything radiates back a gentle heat, and there is a sense of reprieve, of having passed through the worst, of being safe again in a more secure way. The children are playing quietly near one of the hearths, building something with sticks and scraps of leather, their voices a pleasant murmur, and the adults are engaged in various tasks, some working, some resting, some simply sitting and talking, and the atmosphere is peaceful, almost drowsy, the Longhouse having become a refuge not just from cold but from urgency, a place where time moves differently, where the winter day stretches out long and slow. You find yourself sitting with your grandmother, helping her sort dried herbs, and she is talking about sleep, about how it changes with the seasons, how summer sleep is different from winter sleep, lighter and briefer in summer, when there is so much to do, and the warm nights make rest easy, deeper and longer in winter when the body needs more time to restore itself, when the cold makes sleep both more necessary and more challenging. She tells you that learning to sleep well in winter is one of the most important skills a person can develop, that those who sleep poorly become weak, become sick, become vulnerable, while those who have mastered the art of winter sleep maintain their strength, their health, their spirit. She explains that sleep in the Longhouse is successful not because of any single thing, but because of many things working together: the location and design of the building, the construction of the sleeping platforms, the quality and arrangement of the furs, the maintenance of the fires, the sharing of body heat, the timing of meals, the management of activity levels, the understanding of when to rest and when to move, and above all the knowledge that has been accumulated across generations, refined through experience, adapted to the specific conditions of this place, this climate, this people. She tells you that you are inheriting all of this, that by learning to sleep well in the Longhouse you are connecting yourself to everyone who has slept here before you, to all the winters they survived, to all the knowledge they preserved and passed on. You listen to her words and you understand that what seemed simple, lying down beneath furs and sleeping, is actually complex and profound, that it is a practice, a discipline, a form of wisdom, that it represents humanity's long struggle to make peace with cold and darkness, to find ways to rest and restore even in conditions that would naturally keep a person awake and anxious. You think about last night, about how you prepared your sleeping place, about how you arranged the furs and positioned the stones and settled your body and controlled your breathing, and you see now that each of these actions was part of a system, that you were performing a ritual refined over centuries, that you were using technology as sophisticated in its way as any tool, any weapon, any device humans have invented. The afternoon deepens and the light begins to fail early as it does in winter, and the Longhouse grows dimmer, the fires becoming once again the primary source of illumination, and there is a familiar quality to this transition, a sense of the day completing itself, of evening arriving not as a disruption but as a natural progression, as the world settling back toward sleep, toward rest, toward the quiet darkness that is half of every day, the necessary complement to light and activity. You help prepare the evening meal, working with your mother and sisters to combine the ingredients, to cook them slowly over the fire, to serve them to the family, and there is a rhythm to these actions, a choreography that you all know, that requires no discussion, no instruction, just shared competence developed through countless repetitions. As you eat dinner, your uncle tells a story about his grandfather, about a winter when he was young and the cold came harder and faster than anyone had expected. Before the longhouse was properly prepared, before enough furs had been gathered, before enough wood had been cut, and how the people had to work together, sharing what they had, improvising solutions, staying awake in shifts to keep the fires going, and how they made it through but barely, and how after that winter new rules were established, new practices, new levels of preparation, how that difficult experience became teaching, became knowledge that protected future generations, became part of the inheritance that you now benefit from. He tells the story not to frighten but to instruct, to help everyone appreciate what they have, to understand that the relative comfort and security of this winter is not accidental, not guaranteed, but earned through foresight and effort and the application of hard-won wisdom. As night falls fully and the family begins again to prepare for sleep, you feel a difference from last night, a confidence that wasn't quite there before, because now you have proof. Now you have lived through one of the coldest nights of winter and slept well and woken strong. And you know that you can do it again, that the methods work, that the knowledge is sound. You return to your sleeping place, to the same furs and the same position on the platform. But tonight you arrange everything with more certainty, more precision, applying what yesterday was theory but today is confirmed practice, what yesterday was inherited instruction but today is personal experience. Your mother brings you a freshly heated stone, wrapped in leather, still radiating fierce warmth, and you tuck it down by your feet, feeling its heat immediate and intense, and you thank her, and she smiles and touches your hair briefly, a gesture of affection and approval, and then she moves on to tend to the younger children, to make sure everyone is settled, everyone is warm, everyone is safe. You watch her move through the dimness, a dark figure silhouetted against the fire glow, and you think about how much work goes into each night, how many individual acts of care and preparation, how much knowledge must be applied, how much attention must be paid, and how all of this is done quietly, without fanfare, without complaint, simply because it is what must be done, what has always been done, what will continue to be done as long as people live in this place, in this climate, in this way. You pull the furs around you, feeling their familiar weight and texture, and you settle into position, and your body recognizes this transition, knows what it means, and begins immediately to relax, to prepare for sleep. And tonight this happens more easily than last night, more smoothly, because your body has learned, has adapted, has understood that this is safe, that this works, that sleep beneath these furs in this longhouse is not just possible but good, is not just survivable but restful. Around you the sounds of settling continue, the familiar symphony of a large family preparing for night, and you let these sounds wash over you. Let them become part of your descent into sleep, markers on a known path, signposts guiding you down into darkness and dreams. Tonight you understand something that you did not understand last night, something that perhaps can only be understood through experience rather than explanation, which is that sleeping in the longhouse is not about fighting the cold or denying it or escaping from it, but about accepting it, acknowledging its presence and its power, and then using knowledge and community and carefully developed practice to create small pockets of warmth, small refuges, small victories that add up over the course of a night, over the course of a winter, over the course of a lifetime, to something larger, something that deserves to be called wisdom, that deserves to be preserved and passed on, that deserves to be honored as one of humanity's great achievements. This simple, profound ability to sleep well even when the world is cold and dark, to rest even when conditions would naturally prevent rest, to find peace even in the heart of winter's severity. You have made it through the winter, though you did not always believe you would. Spring does not arrive all at once in this northern place. It comes in whispers, in hints, in the smallest shifts that only someone who has watched snow for months can recognize. The light through the smoke hole changes first. Not brighter, exactly, but different, less gray, touched with something that makes you think of water moving under ice. The cold remains, still pressing against the longhouse walls, still seeping through every crack and seam. But now there are moments, brief and fleeting, when the air inside feels almost warm without the constant feeding of fires, when the smoke seems to rise more easily, pulled upward by some subtle change in the world beyond. You lie in your sleeping place in the early morning, wrapped in furs that have become extensions of your own body over these long months, and you listen to the house breathing around you. The sounds are familiar now. Every creak and settle, every cough and murmur, every small movement of the people who share this space with you. You know without looking that the grandmother is already awake in her corner, that the young mother is nursing her infant, that the Hunter 2 platforms down has risen and is preparing to go out into the changing world. The baby survived. This feels like a miracle, though you know it is simply what happens, what has always happened. Some children make it through their first winter, and some do not. The mother's face has changed over these months. The tight fear that lived there in the darkest part of winter has eased, replaced by something quieter, a cautious hope. She still keeps the child close against her skin, still wraps both of them in every fur and hide available. But there is a lightness now in how she moves, a softness in how she speaks to the other women. You have changed too, though you cannot see it in yourself the way you can see it in others. Your body has learned things your mind did not teach it. How to sleep in cold that would once have seemed unbearable, how to find warmth in arrangements of fur and proximity that would once have seemed inadequate, how to wake in darkness and know exactly where you are without panic or disorientation. Your skin has thickened in some indefinable way. Your tolerance for discomfort has expanded like a vessel that grows to accommodate whatever is poured into it. The young man who struggled so much in the early winter is outside now. You can hear his voice calling to someone, and the sound carries a strength that was not there before. He did not die, though there were nights when you thought he might, when his coughing seemed to shake the entire sleeping platform, when the old woman made teas and poultices with increasingly grim determination. Something in him refused to give way, or perhaps something in the collective will of the Longhouse held him here. The shared warmth and the grandmother's remedies and the simple fact that there was nowhere else for him to go, no choice but to endure. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb the furs too much, mindful of the cold air that waits beyond their shelter. The movement is ritual by now, practiced, efficient. You have learned to dress while still mostly covered, to preserve the warmth you have cultivated through the night, to transition from sleep to waking without the shock that once accompanied each morning. The clothes you pull on are the same ones you have worn for months, stiff with smoke and wear, but they are yours, broken into your body's shape, familiar as skin. The central fire is lower than it was in deepest winter, but it still burns, tended by whoever wakes first, fed with the wood that is counted more carefully now as the supply in the storage area diminishes. You make your way toward it, stepping carefully between sleeping platforms where others still rest, and you crouch near the flames, holding your hands to the heat that has kept all of you alive. The old woman joins you there, moving from her corner with the same steady purpose she has shown every morning since you first came to this place. She does not greet you with words. That is not the custom here, or perhaps it is simply understood that words are not always necessary between people who have shared a space through winter darkness. Instead, she nods once, acknowledging your presence, and begins to prepare something in a clay vessel, adding water from a skin, adding dried herbs from her dwindling stores, setting it near the coals to warm. The ice on the lake is changing, she says after a time, speaking quietly, to you or to herself or to the fire. Soon it will be unsafe to walk on. Then it will be gone. You think about the lake, frozen since before you can remember, the vast white expanse that stretches beyond the village, the fishing holes that have been maintained with such constant effort, the sleds that have moved across its surface carrying wood and water and whatever else was needed. The idea that it might become water again, moving water, seems almost impossible, as though winter is the permanent state of things and everything else is only a story people tell to comfort themselves. How long? You ask, and your voice sounds strange to you, rougher than you remember, shaped by months of breathing smoke and cold air. Not long now, she replies. The birds know. They are coming back. You have not noticed birds, but then you have not been looking for them, have not thought to look up when going outside, focused instead on the immediate concerns of cold and wind and the effort of moving through snow. But now that she has said it, you realize you did hear something yesterday, a call that was not the raven's harsh cry, something smaller and lighter, a sound that carried a different message. The tea she is making begins to steam, and the smell of it fills the space around the fire. Something green and bitter, touched with sweetness, different from the heavy, sustaining broths of winter. She pours some into a wooden cup and hands it to you without ceremony. You take it, wrapping both hands around the warmth, and drink carefully, letting the heat move down through your chest, feeling your body respond to it, waking more fully. You did well, the old woman says, still looking at the fire rather than at you. Many do not make it through their first winter in the Longhouse. The statement hangs in the air between you, and you do not know how to respond to it. You did nothing, really. You simply did not die, simply endured what had to be endured because there was no alternative. But you sense that she means something more than mere survival, that she is acknowledging some quality of adaptation, some willingness to learn the ways of this place and these people, to bend without breaking. The young man, you say, asking without asking. He will be stronger now, she replies. Illness that does not kill you leaves something behind, a knowing in the body. He will be useful in ways he was not before. You think about usefulness, about what makes a person valuable in a place like this, and you understand that it is not about strength alone or skill, but about something harder to name, the capacity to fit yourself into the collective effort, to contribute what you can without disrupting the delicate balance that keeps everyone alive. The young man's stubbornness, his refusal to surrender, has become part of that balance. His survival is now woven into the story the Longhouse tells about itself. Other people are waking now, emerging from their fur cocoons, moving through the morning routines that have been repeated every day for months. There is a different quality to the movement today, something you cannot quite identify but can feel nonetheless, a lightness, perhaps, or an opening, as though everyone senses the approaching change and is preparing for it in small, unconscious ways. The hunter you have watched all winter is checking his weapons near the wall, running his hands over spear shafts and knife handles, testing edges and bindings. His preparation has a different purpose now. Soon he will be hunting differently, pursuing animals that are also responding to spring, moving and feeding in new patterns. The knowledge required for this is something he carries in his body and mind, accumulated over years, and you feel a kind of awe watching him, understanding that this expertise is what has kept the Longhouse fed when the stored food ran low, when the fish stopped biting, when the snow was too deep for easy travel. The children who played quietly through the winter are more animated now, their voices rising higher, their games becoming more energetic. They are confined still, the outside world not yet safe or welcoming, but something in them responds to the shifting season, to the lengthening light, to the change in their elders' demeanor. The very young ones, who knew nothing before this winter, have learned to walk and talk inside these walls, have developed their first understandings of the world in smoke-filled dimness, warmed by communal fires. What they will make of the outside world, when it finally opens to them, you cannot imagine. You spend the morning doing small tasks, mending a tear in one of your sleeping furs, using a bone needle and sinew thread that the old woman provides, copying the tight, careful stitches you have watched others make. The work is meditative, repetitive, and your hands are more skilled than they were months ago, more confident. You have made and repaired many things through the winter, learning by watching and by doing, and now your fingers know things your mind does not fully understand. How tension should feel in a stitch, how materials behave, how to solve small practical problems through touch and adjustment. Around you, the Longhouse hums with similar activity. People are checking stored food, assessing what remains, planning for the transitional time ahead when winter supplies run out, but spring abundance has not yet arrived. This is a dangerous time, you have learned, when hunger can become serious, when bodies weakened by months of cold are most vulnerable to illness and accident. The calculations being made are careful, conservative, based on experience and tradition, and the kind of collective memory that exists in a group of people who have survived together many times before. The young mother comes to sit near you, the baby drowsy in her arms, and she watches your mending for a time without speaking. You have not talked much with her through the winter. She has been absorbed in her child, and you have been focused on your own survival and learning. But there is a companionship between you now, the recognition of two people who have endured something difficult side by side. I did not think we would make it, she says quietly, looking down at her baby's face. There were nights when I thought I would wake and find him cold. You pause in your stitching, unsure what response is appropriate, what comfort or acknowledgement she needs. The fear she describes is so intimate, so terrible, that words seem inadequate to meet it. But we did, you say finally, simply, and she nods, her eyes still on the child. We did, she echoes, and there is something in her voice that makes you understand that this survival is not just a fact but a victory, something that will be remembered and recounted, something that changes how she understands herself and her place in the world. She has kept a new life alive through winter darkness and cold that kills without hesitation. She has become part of the unbroken chain of mothers who have done this same thing since time before memory. The day moves forward in its slow, familiar rhythm. Food is prepared and eaten. Less than you would like, more than some have in harder winters, enough. The fires are tended. People go outside for brief periods and return with news of the changing world. The snow is wetter now, heavier. The wind has shifted to come from the south more often. There are tracks of animals that have not been seen for months. You go outside yourself in the afternoon, stepping through the entrance into light that is genuinely bright, no longer the pale ghost of illumination that characterized winter. The snow is still deep, still covering everything, but it looks different now, more granular, settling and consolidating rather than light and drifting. The air smells different too, carrying something that might be earth or water, something underneath the cold, a promise of transformation. You stand there for a time, letting your eyes adjust to the brightness, feeling the sun on your face with an intensity you had forgotten was possible. The cold is still real, still dangerous, but it no longer feels absolute, no longer feels like the only truth. You can sense the season turning, can feel in your bones that the world is preparing to change, and the feeling is both exhilarating and frightening. Winter was hard, but it was also known, predictable in its demands, and what comes next is full of different challenges and uncertainties. When you return inside, you bring with you some of the bright, cold air, and people turn their faces toward you as though you carry news, as though the outside world clings to you in ways they can sense. You move back to your sleeping area, not ready to return fully to the fire's circle, wanting to sit in your own space and process what you have felt and understood. The light through the smoke hole is changing again, beginning its long descent toward evening, and you watch the way it moves across the longhouse interior, illuminating different areas as it shifts, creating momentary brightness on faces and objects before moving on. This light is something you have watched for months, one of the few things that changes regularly inside this constant space, and you have learned to read it, to know what time it is, what part of the day or season, by its angle and quality and color. You think about the night ahead, another night of sleep in familiar furs in your familiar place. But now it feels different knowing that the long sequence of such nights is approaching its end. There will be a time soon when you do not sleep here, when the longhouse empties for the warmer months, when people move to summer dwellings or simply spend more time outside, spreading into the landscape that winter compressed into this small space. You cannot quite imagine it, cannot picture yourself anywhere but here, in this smoke-filled dimness, surrounded by these particular people and their sounds and smells and presence. The evening meal is prepared, and the smell of it draws everyone to the central fire, the daily gathering that has structured every winter evening. The food is divided with the same careful fairness that has been practiced throughout the cold months, and you eat slowly, savoring each bite, aware that the stores are low but trusting that they will last, that the community's careful planning and rationing will see everyone through to the time when food becomes abundant again. The hunter speaks during the meal, telling a story about a spring hunt from years past, and everyone listens with the particular attention that stories command here, where entertainment is scarce and oral tradition carries practical knowledge, as well as cultural memory. The story is about hunger and patience, about tracking an animal for days through melting snow, about the moment of success and the feast that followed. And as he tells it, you can see the same scenes taking shape in other people's faces, the shared imagination that brings the past forward into the present. When the story ends, the grandmother speaks about plants that will appear soon in the newly bare ground, about roots and shoots and early greens that can be gathered, about the knowledge required to find and identify and prepare them. She is teaching, you realize, passing on information that everyone here probably knows already, but needs to remember, needs to have refreshed before the season of plenty arrives and makes this knowledge immediately necessary. You listen to her with the same attention you have brought to everything here, understanding that this too is part of what has kept you alive. The willingness to learn, to absorb information, even when you do not fully understand its context or application. Trusting that the knowing will be there when you need it, stored in your memory alongside all the other small pieces of knowledge you have accumulated. The evening deepens. The fire is built up for the night, the last major feeding before people retire to their sleeping places. The wood supply is visibly reduced now, the storage area showing gaps and spaces that were not there months ago, but there is enough, there will be enough, the same calculation that has governed everything here. Not abundance, but sufficiency, the careful balance between need and resource. You make your way to your sleeping platform as the longhouse settles into its night configuration. People arranging themselves in their furs, children being tucked in close to parents, the elderly being checked on by whoever has taken responsibility for their care. The routine is so familiar now that you could do it in complete darkness, could find your place and arrange your bedding and settle yourself without thought. But tonight you pause before lying down, looking around the longhouse interior in the firelight, seeing the shapes of people in their sleeping places, the shadows on the walls, the smoke rising toward the hole in the roof, the whole contained world that has been your universe for longer than you can quite measure. You are memorizing it, you realize, storing it away as something that will become memory, that will shift from present experience to past recollection, that will be something you will tell stories about in other winters, other longhouses, other times when survival depends on shared warmth and collective effort. You lie down finally, pulling the furs around you with practiced efficiency, finding the arrangement that preserves warmth and allows comfort, the solution to the small puzzle that you solve anew every night. Your body settles into the platform, into the slight depression worn by months of occupancy, and you feel the familiar ache of tired muscles, the soreness that comes from a day of small tasks and careful movement in cold air, the background discomfort that has become so normal you hardly notice it except when you deliberately turn your attention to it. The baby is crying somewhere, not the distressed wail of illness or hunger, but the simple complaint of a child who is tired and resisting sleep. And you hear the mother's soft voice soothing, singing something low and rhythmic that you cannot quite make out. The sound is comforting rather than disturbing, a reminder that life continues, that new people are being initiated into these patterns of warmth and survival, that the knowledge you have gained this winter is being transmitted, in other forms, to the next generation. Someone is snoring, the sound you have heard every night for months, a deep rhythmic rumble that is part of the longhouse's night soundscape. You used to find it irritating, but now it is simply there, a marker of normalcy, and you would probably find its absence unsettling, would wake in the night troubled by the missing element. The fire pops and settles, sending a shower of sparks upward toward the smoke hole, and the light shifts momentarily, brightening and then dimming, the eternal pulse of flame and fuel that governs the night. You watch it through half-closed eyes, seeing the play of light on the ceiling, the shadows that expand and contract, the whole subtle dance that has been your night light for months. Your thoughts begin to drift as sleep approaches, moving through the day just past, through the winter just ending, through the strange journey that brought you from incomprehension to something like understanding, from fear to acceptance, from cold to warmth found in unlikely places. You think about the people around you, each of them a small universe of experience and knowledge and survival, each of them contributing to the collective effort that has kept the longhouse alive and functional through the long dark. You think about the young man who nearly died and did not, whose coughing still sometimes punctuates the night, but with less frequency, less desperation. You think about the hunter, whose skill and patience have provided food when food was scarce. You think about the grandmother, whose knowledge of medicine and plants and the ways of living through winter is the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent in places like this, doing what needs to be done. You think about the young mother and her baby, symbols of continuity, of the way life persists despite all the forces arrayed against it, despite cold and darkness and hunger and fear. You think about your own role in this small society, whatever that role has become, not central, not critical, but real nonetheless, a functioning piece of the larger mechanism. Someone who has learned enough to contribute, to fit in, to be part of the collective warmth rather than a drain upon it. Sleep is very close now, hovering at the edges of consciousness, and you let yourself drift toward it without resistance, trusting the furs to hold warmth around you, trusting the longhouse to shelter you through another night, trusting that you will wake again in the morning to find the world still turning toward spring, still moving through its ancient patterns of darkness and light, cold and warmth, death and survival. The sounds of the longhouse fade into a general murmur, individual elements becoming indistinguishable from each other, blending into the white noise of communal living, the background hum against which your sleep will unfold. You are held here, suspended in this moment between waking and dreaming, between winter and spring, between what was and what will be. Your last conscious thought is simple and wordless, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition, or simply the acknowledgement that you are here, alive, having made it through something you did not know you could survive, having learned things you did not know you needed to learn, having become someone slightly different from who you were when winter began. Then sleep takes you, pulls you down into its dark warmth, and the night continues around you in the longhouse, the fire burning low, but not going out, the people breathing in their sleeping places, the smoke rising steadily through the hole in the roof toward stars that will overhead in patterns that mark the season's slow turn. Everything held in balance. Everything sustained by warmth shared and effort joined, and the simple determination to see morning come again. And morning does come, as it always has and always will. Light returning to the smoke hole. The day beginning again with all its small tasks and shared routines. The longhouse waking to another day closer to spring. Another day of survival earned through collective care and ancient knowledge, and the willingness to endure cold for the sake of the warmth that lies beyond it. Waiting in the lengthening light, in the melting snow, in the returning birds that know what you are only beginning to. Remember, that winter ends, that life returns, that the long night in the longhouse is not forever but only a season, a necessary darkness that makes the coming brightness possible. You wake on the last morning of deepest winter not to birdsong, but to silence so complete it feels like presence, like someone standing beside you in the dark waiting for you to notice them. The fire in the hearth pit has burned down to its final embers, barely glowing, and the cold air that presses against your face carries in it the promise of something shifting. Some fundamental turning in the season that you cannot yet name, but can feel in your bones the way you feel storms approaching across water. You do not rise immediately. There is no urgency in this hour, no task that cannot wait for the light to strengthen and the others to stir from their sleeping platforms. You lie beneath your furs and listen to the breathing of the longhouse around you, the slow respiration of timbers settling in the cold, the whisper of wind finding its way through gaps in the bark walls, the occasional crack of ice contracting on the roof poles above. These sounds have become so familiar over the long months of winter that they are less sounds now than the texture of silence itself. The way silence actually sounds when you stop expecting it to be absence and learn to hear it as presence. Beside you, your youngest daughter sleeps with one hand curled near her face, her breath steady and deep. She has grown this winter. You can see it in the length of her limbs beneath the bearskin, in the way her face has lost some of its child roundness and taken on the first angles of the person she is becoming. She will be tall, you think taller than her mother, and strong in the way of people who learn early how to carry weight without complaint. All winter you have watched her tend the fires, manage her share of the work, endure the cold and the close quarters, and the endless sameness of short days with a patience that surprised you at first but no longer does. Across the longhouse, someone coughs quietly and then settles back into sleep. You recognize the sound. It is the old woman from the family whose hearth sits nearest the door, the one who has lived through more winters than anyone can accurately count, and who carries in her memory stories that reach back to times when the longhouse itself was young, when the great posts that hold up the roof were newly cut and still wept sap in the summer heat. She has told you some of those stories on the longest nights, her voice thin but clear in the firelight, and in her telling you have glimpsed the length of time that this way of living represents, the countless generations who learned as you have learned how to make warmth in the cold, how to preserve life when the world outside seemed intent on taking it away. You think about those generations now as you lie in the dark. You think about all the people who have slept in this longhouse and in longhouses like it across the length and breadth of this northern world, all the bodies that have huddled together beneath furs and hides, all the fires that have been tended through long winter nights, all the breath that has misted in cold air and then been drawn back and again warmed by human proximity. The thought is both humbling and oddly comforting. This knowledge that you are part of something so much larger than yourself, that the skills you have learned and the endurance you have developed were not invented by you, but inherited from a lineage that stretches back into a past so distant it becomes indistinguishable from the land itself. The light begins to change almost imperceptibly, the darkness lifting by degrees so gradual that you cannot point to the moment when night becomes dawn, but only recognize that it has happened. Gray light seeps through the smoke holes in the roof, thin and watery at first, then slowly gathering strength. You watch it move across the interior of the longhouse, revealing by inches the familiar landscape of your winter world. The hearth stones, the drying racks, the stacks of firewood diminished now, but still sufficient, the sleeping forms of your neighbors wrapped in their furs, the dogs curled nose to tail on the platforms. You rise finally, moving carefully so as not to disturb your daughter, and you step down from the platform onto the cold earth floor. The shock of cold against your feet is immediate and clarifying. You walk barefoot to the hearth pit and kneel beside it, looking down at the embers that glow like small red eyes in the ash. There is still heat here, still life. You add a handful of fine bark shavings and blow gently, and the embers brighten and catch and send up their first thin spirals of smoke. Then kindling, then split wood, and the fire begins its daily resurrection, building from nothing into something, from darkness into light, from cold into warmth. This is how every day has begun for months now. This small ceremony of fire building has become so automatic that your hands perform it without thought, a sequence of movements learned in childhood and repeated so many thousands of times that they have become inseparable from your sense of who you are. But this morning you find yourself paying attention to each gesture, noticing the weight of the wood in your hands, the smell of smoke beginning to rise, the heat beginning to radiate outward from the growing flames. You are suddenly aware that this may be one of the last times this winter that you perform this task with such urgency, that soon the mornings will be warmer and the fires less necessary, that the season is turning even now as you kneel here on cold earth watching flame consume wood. Around you, others begin to wake. You hear the rustle of furs being pushed aside, the soft groans and sighs of people rising from sleep into cold air, the quiet conversations that start each day. Your wife appears beside you at the fire, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she crouches down and extends her hands toward the flames without speaking. You do not need words for this. You simply share the growing warmth in silence, two bodies orienting themselves around the fire as they have done every morning for as long as you have been together. The old woman from near the door has risen as well. You see her standing by her family's hearth wrapped in a heavy robe, looking up toward the smoke holes in the roof where the gray morning light has begun to brighten towards something that might eventually become blue. She stands very still, and there is something in her posture that draws your attention, some quality of attention in the way she holds herself. You rise and walk over to her, and when you reach her side you look up as she is looking, following her gaze to the patch of visible sky. "The stars have gone," she says quietly. Her voice is soft and thoughtful. "They began to leave in the night. I saw them fade one by one." You nod, understanding what she means. The winter stars, the constellations that have wheeled overhead through all the long dark months, are becoming invisible now in the growing light of longer days. Their departure is one of the signs that the season is changing, that the earth is tilting back toward the sun, that the time of deepest cold is passing. "Spring will come," she continues, still looking upward. "It always does, though there are winters when I wonder if I will see it come again." "You will see it," you say. "You have seen many springs." She turns her head to look at you, and there is something complex in her expression, amusement perhaps, or affection, or a kind of gentle skepticism. "Perhaps," she says. "But each one comes as a surprise, even so. I do not take them for granted anymore. I do not take any of this for granted." She gestures around her at the longhouse, at the fires beginning to burn in each family's hearth, at the people moving in the gray morning light, at the whole structure and system of survival that has sustained you all through the winter. "This," she says, "this skill of living together, this knowledge of how to make warmth, it is the most important thing we have. More important than any tool or weapon. More important than strength or speed or any individual skill. The knowledge of how to survive together through the cold. This is what has allowed us to live in this country, in this climate where the winters are so long and the nights so dark. Without this, we would have perished long ago. All of us. There would be no one here to see the spring come." You stand beside her in silence, considering her words. You have never heard her speak quite this way before, with this particular intensity, and you sense that she is trying to pass something on to you, some understanding that she has arrived at after many years, and that she feels compelled to share. "When I was young," she continues, "I thought survival was a matter of individual strength. I thought the people who survived were the strong ones, the clever ones, the lucky ones. And there is truth in that, of course. Strength helps. Cleverness helps. Luck most certainly helps. But over time I came to understand that survival is not primarily an individual achievement. It is a collective one. We survive because we have learned how to live together, how to share warmth and food and labor, how to care for each other through the darkest times. The longhouse itself is proof of this. We could not heat individual shelters through such winters, but together, sharing space and fire and body warmth, we endure." She pauses, and you see her looking around the longhouse again, her gaze moving from family to family, hearth to hearth. "I wanted you to understand this," she says finally. You and others of your generation who will carry this knowledge forward. The skills matter. How to build fires, how to prepare skins, how to store food and preserve heat. But what matters more is the understanding that we are only warm because we are together. That is the real knowledge. That is what must be preserved. You nod slowly, feeling the weight of what she is saying settle into you. You have lived this truth all winter without quite articulating it to yourself. But hearing her speak it aloud gives it a different kind of solidity. You think of all the nights you have slept surrounded by your family and your neighbors, all the shared fires, all the collective work of survival, and you recognize that she is right. The warmth has always been communal, the survival always shared. Thank you, you say quietly. I will remember. She reaches out and briefly touches your arm, her hand thin and cold even through the sleeve of your tunic. See that you do, she says. And teach your children. They will need this knowledge as much as we have. The day unfolds around you then in the usual patterns. Food is prepared and eaten. The fires are tended. People move about their tasks with the slow deliberateness of those who have lived through long winter and are beginning to feel its end approaching. The children play quietly on the sleeping platforms, their games subdued but persistent. The dogs wake and stretch and pad between the hearths looking for scraps. The ordinary machinery of daily life continues its turning. But you find yourself moving through the day with a new quality of attention, noticing things you have stopped seeing through sheer familiarity. You notice how people naturally gravitate toward the fires, how conversations happen most easily in the warmth of the hearth, how even the dogs understand that the fire is the center around which everything else organizes itself. You notice the way people share the warmth without thinking about it, shifting to make room for someone new who approaches the fire, passing warm food to children first before serving themselves, draping an extra fur over someone who is shivering. These are small gestures, unremarkable in themselves, but you see them now as part of a larger pattern of care and cooperation that has operated all winter beneath your conscious awareness. No one has demanded these behaviors. No one enforces them or checks to make sure everyone is complying. They simply happen, automatically, because they are necessary, because everyone understands at some deep unspoken level that survival depends on everyone's willingness to participate in the collective work of staying alive. In the afternoon, you walk to the door of the longhouse and push aside the hide covering and step outside into the cold. The air hits you immediately, sharp and clean, and you stand for a moment breathing it in, feeling your lungs expand with cold that is somehow different from the cold of deep winter. Less brutal, less absolute, carrying in it the faintest suggestion of something milder to come. The snow is still deep across the clearing, but its surface has changed, no longer the dry powder of the coldest months, but something denser and slightly wet, snow beginning its long, slow transformation back into water. The sky above is a pale blue, cloudless and vast. You stand looking up at it, and you think about the old woman's words about the stars fading in the growing light. You cannot see them now, of course, but you know they are still there above the blue, still wheeling through their ancient patterns, only invisible in daylight. The thought comforts you. The knowledge that things can be present even when unseen, that absence is not always disappearance, but sometimes only transformation. You hear footsteps behind you, and turn to see your oldest son emerging from the longhouse. He comes to stand beside you, his breath misting in the cold air, and together you look out across the snow-covered clearing toward the forest beyond. It feels different today, he says after a moment. The cold, I mean. It feels less heavy. You nod. The season is turning, you say. We are through the worst of it. He is quiet for a while, and you can sense him thinking, working towards something he wants to say. Finally he speaks again. I was thinking this morning about next winter, he says. About what it will be like. Whether it will be as hard as this one. You consider this. Every winter is hard, you say carefully. But now you know what to expect. You know what is required. That knowledge makes it easier, even when the work itself remains difficult. Will we sleep in the longhouse again? He asks. All of us together? Yes, you say. Of course. That is how it is done. That is how we survive. He nods, seeming satisfied with this answer, and you realize that he was not asking out of dread but out of something else. Perhaps a desire for confirmation that the structure and pattern of what he has experienced this winter will continue, that there is continuity and predictability in the life that lies ahead. He has learned this winter that survival is possible, that the cold can be endured, that there is a kind of security in knowing exactly what is required and how to meet those requirements. I am glad, he says simply. I think I will sleep better next winter. Now that I know how to do it. You put your hand on his shoulder and squeeze briefly. You did well this winter, you tell him. You learned quickly. You did your share and more. He looks at you then, and in his face you see a flash of pleasure at your words, a brief opening of pride and satisfaction before he controls his expression and simply nods. Thank you, he says. I tried to do what was needed. That is all anyone can do, you say. Try to do what is needed. And you have. You stand together in the cold for a few minutes more, neither of you speaking, just sharing the space and the sharp, clean air and the pale blue sky. Then together you turn and go back inside, back into the smoke and warmth and close human atmosphere of the Longhouse, back into the world you have made together out of necessity and knowledge and collective will. The evening comes early still, though not as early as it did at the darkest point of winter. The light lasts a little longer each day now, a few minutes of reprieve from darkness gained back from the turning of the earth. You eat your evening meal with your family, gathered around your hearth as you have gathered every evening for months. And the food tastes good in the way that food always tastes good when you are warm and tired and surrounded by people you love. After the meal, as the darkness settles fully over the Longhouse and the fires burn bright in their pits, someone begins to sing. It is one of the men from a family near the center, a man with a good strong voice, and he sings one of the old songs, one that everyone knows. Others join in gradually, voices blending in the smoky air, and the song fills the Longhouse with its familiar rhythms and repeated phrases. You do not sing, but you listen, and the sound wraps around you like another kind of warmth, another kind of shelter against the cold. The song ends and another begins, and then another. This is how many evenings have ended this winter, with singing that requires no particular skill or performance, but only participation, only the willingness to raise your voice and add it to the collective sound. The songs are old and simple, their melodies easy to follow, their words often repeated until they become almost meaningless, just sounds shaped by human mouths and throats and lungs, sounds that push back against the silence and darkness outside. Your youngest daughter leans against you as the singing continues, her weight warm and solid against your side. She is almost asleep, hovering in that borderland between waking and dreaming where the sounds around her blend into the landscape of her drowsing mind. You put your arm around her and hold her steady, and she settles more deeply against you, her breathing slowing and deepening. You look around the Longhouse at the gathered families, at the fires burning in their pits, at the faces visible in the firelight, some singing, some listening, some attending to small tasks, some simply sitting in the warmth staring into flames. These people have become more than neighbors to you over the course of the winter. They have become something else, something for which you do not have a precise word. Not quite family, but not separate from family either. Something between and beyond. People with whom you have shared the intimacy of survival, with whom you have cooperated in the daily work of staying alive, with whom you have slept and woken and eaten and existed through the long dark months. You realize that you will carry these faces with you always now, that they have been impressed into your memory in a way that goes deeper than ordinary acquaintance. You will know them not just as individuals, but as part of the texture of this particular winter, this particular experience of cold and darkness and warmth found in shared spaces. Years from now, when you think back on this winter, it will be their faces you see in the firelight, their voices you hear blending in song, their presence you remember as the context in which you learned what you learned and survived what you survived. The singing fades eventually into quiet conversation, and then into silence as people begin to prepare for sleep. The fires are banked for the night, built up with slow-burning wood that will hold heat through the dark hours. People climb onto their sleeping platforms and arrange their furs and settle into the familiar positions and configurations they have occupied all winter long. The Longhouse fills with the soft sounds of people settling into rest, the rustle of hides, the creak of platform poles, the murmur of last quiet words exchanged between family members. You help your daughter up onto the platform and tuck the bearskin around her, and she curls immediately into sleep without even opening her eyes. Your wife climbs up beside you, and your sons arrange themselves in their customary places, and you all lie down together in the warmth beneath the furs as you have lain down every night for months beyond counting. But tonight you do not fall asleep immediately. You lie on your back looking up toward the darkness where the roof rises invisible above you, and you think about everything that has happened this winter, everything you have learned and endured and understood. You think about the cold outside and the warmth inside. You think about the knowledge that has been passed down through countless generations and that you are now part of passing forward. You think about the old woman's words about collective survival, about the understanding that you are only warm because you are together. And you think about the spring that is coming, the slow turning of the season that has already begun even as the cold persists. You think about the snow melting, the ice breaking, the rivers beginning to flow again. You think about the return of birds, the emergence of green things from the earth, the lengthening of days and the warming of air. You think about how this longhouse will empty as the weather improves, how families will move back to their summer dwellings, how the concentrated closeness of winter will dissipate into the more dispersed pattern of warmer months. But you also think about next winter, about how when the cold comes again you will return to this place, to this structure, to this way of living. You will return because it works, because it is what allows life to persist in this climate and this season. You will return because the knowledge of how to survive the winter has been preserved and passed down, and you are now one of its carriers, one of its guardians, one of the people responsible for making sure it continues into the future. The darkness settles more fully around you. The fire in your hearth has burned down to coals, radiating steady heat. Around you, your family sleeps, their breathing quiet and regular. Throughout the longhouse, other families sleep in the same way. Other hearth fires glow in the darkness. Other bodies rest beneath furs and hides. The whole structure is filled with sleeping humans, and the warmth they have made together, the shared warmth that keeps life going through the coldest nights. You close your eyes and feel yourself beginning to drift towards sleep. But even as you drift, part of your mind remains aware of where you are and who surrounds you. You are aware of the longhouse as both shelter and community, as both physical structure and social arrangement. You are aware that you are safe here not because the walls are impenetrable or the roof is perfect, but because you are surrounded by people who share your commitment to survival, who understand that their safety is inseparable from yours, who know that warmth must be made and maintained collectively if it is to be made at all. This is the knowledge you will carry forward. This is what you will teach your children and your children's children. Not just the practical skills of fire building and hide preparation and food storage, though those matter immensely, but the deeper understanding that survival in hard times depends on cooperation, on sharing, on the willingness to live closely with others and to care for them as you care for yourself. The understanding that warmth in winter is not an individual achievement, but a collective one, not something you create alone, but something you build together, fire by fire, night by night, breath by shared breath in cold, dark air. You are almost asleep now, hovering on the edge of consciousness, and in this liminal state the boundary between yourself and your surroundings becomes less distinct. You are aware of your own body beneath the furs, but you are also aware of all the other bodies sleeping throughout the longhouse, and it seems to you that you are all part of one larger organism, one collective life that breathes and rests and generates warmth in the darkness. The thought does not frighten you. Instead, it comforts you, this sense of being part of something larger than yourself, something that will persist beyond your individual life, and that connects you backward to all who came before and forward to all who will come after. The longhouse sighs around you, its timbers settling, its fires glowing. Outside, the cold continues its work. The stars will overhead in their ancient patterns. The winter earth holds its frozen vise. Inside, surrounded by sleeping humans and banked fires and the smell of smoke and bodies and hides, you let yourself finally slip down into sleep, into the deep rest that comes when you are warm enough and safe enough and no longer alone. And in your sleep, you dream of spring. You dream of ice melting, of water running over stones, of green shoots pushing up through softening earth. You dream of warmth that comes not from fires but from the sun, warmth that reaches down from the sky and seeps up from the ground and surrounds you without effort or maintenance. You dream of sleeping under stars without furs, of walking barefoot on warm ground, of air that does not hurt to breathe. But even in your dream of spring, you carry with you the memory of winter. You carry the knowledge of cold and the knowledge of how to survive it. You carry the faces of the people who surrounded you in the longhouse and the understanding of what it means to make warmth together in dark times. These things have become part of you now, woven into your sense of who you are and how life must be lived. They will stay with you through all the seasons to come, through warmth and cold, through plenty and scarcity, through all the turnings of the earth and all the changes that time brings. You will remember this winter. You will remember what it taught you. You will remember that you survived not alone but together, not through individual strength, but through collective knowledge and shared effort and the willingness to sleep close to other humans in the cold. And when the next winter comes, as it inevitably will, you will be ready. You will know what to do. You will gather with others in the longhouse, build up the fires, arrange the sleeping platforms, prepare the furs and hides. You will settle in for the long dark months with patience and determination, knowing that spring always follows winter, that cold always gives way to warmth, that survival is possible when people work together and share what they have and care for one another through the hardest times. This is the inheritance you carry. This is the knowledge that has kept your people alive in this northern country for longer than anyone can remember. The knowledge of how to sleep warm in longhouses without heating, which is really the knowledge of how to live together, how to create community and maintain it through difficulty, how to transform individual vulnerability into collective strength. And so you sleep, surrounded by your family and your neighbors, held in the warmth you have all made together, breathing air that smells of smoke and people, and the complex scent of humans living in close quarters through a long season. You sleep deeply and well, your body at rest, your mind at peace, your heart full of the quiet knowledge that you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what needs to be done, part of an unbroken chain of survival that stretches back into the distant past and forward into an unknowable future. Outside, the stars continue their slow wheel across the winter sky. Inside, the fires burn low and steady. The longhouse holds its warmth through another night. And in the morning, when you wake again to cold air and gray light, you will rise and tend the fires and begin another day, carrying forward the ancient knowledge of how people survive together when the world outside is cold and dark, and the only warmth to be found is the warmth you make yourselves, fire by fire, breath by breath, body beside body in the long winter nights. This is how it has always been done. This is how it will continue to be done, as long as there are people in this northern country and winters to be survived. The knowledge passes from generation to generation, carried in skilled hands and patient instruction, and in the physical memory of what it feels like to sleep warm in a cold season surrounded by others who share your fate and your determination to persist. You are part of this now. You carry it forward. And in carrying it forward, you honor all who came before you and prepare the way for all who will come after. The chain remains unbroken. The knowledge continues. The warmth is preserved and passed on, kept alive through the darkest and coldest times. A small, steady flame of human survival and cooperation and care that cannot be extinguished by any winter, however long, however cold, however dark. And so you rest. And so you sleep. And so you wake again to carry on. This is the pattern. This is the way. This is the inheritance of warmth that keeps life going in hard places and difficult seasons. And you are grateful for it, grateful to be part of it, grateful to sleep this night and all the nights to come in the longhouse where the fires burn and the people gather and the cold cannot reach you because you are surrounded by shared warmth, by collective knowledge, by the presence of others who understand as you understand that survival is never singular but always plural, never alone but always together. The night deepens around you. The warmth holds. You sleep on, secure in the knowledge that you will wake tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. That spring will come as it always comes, that you have learned what needed to be learned and survived what needed to be survived. And in your sleeping, you are at peace, wrapped in furs and surrounded by human presence, and held in the embrace of a knowledge as old as your people's time in this cold country, the simple and profound knowledge of how to make warmth last through the longest nights. This is the gift. This is the inheritance. This is what you pass forward. And the longhouse stands through another night, holding its people, preserving its warmth, keeping at bay the cold that surrounds it, keeping alive the knowledge, keeping alive the people, keeping alive the future that will unfold from this moment, from these choices, from this ancient and essential understanding of how humans endure winter when they endure it together.